The arrow came before the warning did. Mara heard the whisper of it through the dark, a thin, cutting sound like cloth tearing in silence, and she was already moving before her mind caught up with what her body knew. She pulled Ilian off the low wooden bed and pressed him to the floor, and the arrow buried itself in the pillow where his small head had been resting, the feathered end still trembling. Ilian did not cry. He was 3 years old and he trusted her completely, which was the only thing that kept him quiet now. He pressed his face into the collar of her night robe and gripped the fabric with both hands, and Mara held him against her chest and stayed very still, listening. The nursery was dark. One small oil lamp burned on the far table, casting a soft circle of amber light that did not reach the corners of the room. The window was open. She always left it open a small amount, because Ilian woke from bad dreams and the night air helped him settle. That window was the problem now. That window was how they had come. She counted her breaths, 1, 2, 3. 4 shadows moved through the gap. They were not large men, but they were quick, and they moved with a quiet that told her they had done this kind of work before. They wore dark clothing. Their faces were covered. They spread out as they entered, the way hunters do when they want to close off every direction a creature might run. Mara did not shift. She was an Omega, and her wolf form was small, built for endurance, not for fighting 4 trained men. Shifting would cost her seconds she did not have, and in those seconds Ilian would be exposed. So she stayed in her human form, crouched on the floor beside the bed, and she put her whole body between the shadows and the child. The first man saw her and stopped. He tilted his head slightly, as if surprised to find a woman guarding the pup. Then he raised his crossbow. She felt the arrow go through her left shoulder like a hot iron rod, spinning her half around. She did not let go of Ilian. The second arrow came from the right. It caught her in the side between her ribs, and the pain was sharp and immediate, like something inside her had been pulled apart. She curled around Ilian instinctively, bringing her back toward the shooters, her arms forming a cage around the boy. She heard him say her name, Mara, very quietly, his mouth against her throat. She pressed her hand over his ear. "Do not look," she said. "Close your eyes, I am here." The third arrow went through her left arm. She felt the impact before the pain, a hard knock, like being struck with a wooden board, and her arm went partially numb, though she did not release her grip. She was on her knees now. She had not decided to go to her knees. Her body had made that decision on its own, the weight of what was happening pulling her down. She stayed curled around Ilian. She kept her back to the men. The fourth arrow struck her in the upper back, angled downward, and the force of it pushed her forward. She caught herself with one hand on the floor and did not fall. She did not fall because falling meant Ilian would be unprotected, and that was the one thing she would not allow. She heard the men moving. She heard them speaking in low voices in a language she did not know well, the clipped, hard syllables of the Ashblood dialect, spoken fast and with urgency. She understood only pieces of it, something about the child, something about not leaving a witness. She heard footsteps coming toward her. Then she heard something else. The sound came from the corridor, a shout, a crash, the heavy thud of boots on stone, and it came fast and it came with force, and the 4 men in the nursery hesitated. That hesitation lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the door of the nursery came open so hard it swung back and cracked against the wall, and the royal guard poured in. Mara did not see what happened after that. She had held on through the whole of it, through 4 arrows and the pain and the cold, and the sound of the men coming toward her. But the moment she heard the guards' voices, she felt something release inside her, like a knot finally giving way. She heard Ilian cry out, not in fear, but in the loud, desperate way of a small child whose body suddenly understands that danger has passed, and that he is allowed to cry now. She thought, good, he is crying, that means he is alive. She let herself fall. The stone floor of the nursery was cold. She was aware of that very clearly, the cold of it against her cheek, the roughness of it against her palm. She was aware of the lamp still burning on the far table, its small flame still steady, untouched by everything that had happened around it. She was aware of Ilian's voice, still crying, and then the voice of the head guard, Rafe, calling for the healers, calling loudly, calling with a sharpness in his voice that she had never heard from him before. She closed her eyes. The last thing she thought, before the darkness came in fully, was that she had forgotten to put the bookmark in the book. She and Ilian had been reading a story about a fox who lived in a forest near a river, and they had stopped halfway through a chapter, and she had meant to mark the page, and she had not. She would have to find the page again when she woke up. She held that thought like a small warm stone and let the darkness come. Mara had come to the royal Pax Palace when she was 19 years old. She had walked through the main gate with a worn canvas bag over one shoulder and a letter of recommendation from the head elder of her home village, a letter that said she was reliable and patient and good with small children. It did not say anything about her wolf form or her rank or her bloodline, because there was nothing impressive to say about any of those things. She was an Omega. In the world she lived in, that meant she was at the lowest rank of wolf society. It meant she was not a fighter. It meant she had no special gifts, no exceptional strength, no ability to command a room or hold ground in a battle. What she had was endurance. What she had was a stillness that other people sometimes mistook for calm. The palace was large and cold, and full of people who did not look at her directly. She was assigned to the domestic staff, then moved to the nursery staff after 6 months. After the head housekeeper noticed, she was the only one who could get the infant Ilian to sleep during the difficult weeks after his mother died. Ilian's mother had been Queen Sira. She had died 3 days after Ilian was born from complications that the healers said could not have been predicted and could not have been prevented. The king, Alpha King Callan, had been sitting outside the healing room when it happened. He had been told before he was allowed inside. When he finally came out 2 hours later, he had Ilian in his arms and he did not speak to anyone for the rest of that day. The palace had gone very quiet after that. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of a place where people were afraid to speak too loudly, in case they disturbed something that was already broken. Mara had arrived 6 months after the queen died. By that time, Ilian was a round-faced, serious-eyed infant who watched everyone who came near him with an intensity that was unusual in a child so young. He did not smile easily. He did not like being handled by people he did not know, but he had accepted Mara from the second week, and after that he would cry if she left the room for too long. She was not sure why. She had not done anything special. She had simply held him the way she had learned to hold frightened things, firmly, without tension, without the anxious energy that small creatures can feel even when they cannot name it. She had talked to him constantly, not baby talk but real words, describing whatever she was doing. "I'm folding this cloth now. It is a very boring cloth. You should close your eyes." She had sung to him very badly songs she half remembered from her own childhood. She had read to him from whatever book was nearby, even books that were clearly not meant for children, a guide to medicinal plants, a record of trade agreements, a history of the eastern borders. He had not cared what she read. He had only cared that she was there and that her voice was steady and that she did not put him down the moment he stopped crying. By the time Ilian was 3, she was the person he reached for first. Not his nursemaid, who was perfectly competent and perfectly kind, and not the palace staff who doted on him. Mara. He would find her in whatever corner of the nursery she had settled in, climb into her lap without asking, and wait for her to continue whatever she was doing. She had a scar on her left collarbone. It was old, pale silver, shaped roughly like a half-moon. Ilian had asked about it once, pressing his small fingers against it with the focused curiosity of a child examining an interesting pebble. "Someone hurt you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Did you cry?" She thought about that for a moment. "Later," she said. He considered this seriously. Then he patted the scar once as if that settled the matter and went back to his book. She had not told him anything else. He had not asked again, which was one of the things she appreciated about him. He was a child who understood in some wordless way that some things did not need to be pulled apart. The scar was from a night 8 years before she came to the palace. She had been 11 years old, and she had been trying to protect a child in her home village when the raiders came through. The child had been 4. His name was Pip. She had put herself between Pip and the men who had come for whatever the village had that was worth taking, and she had received the wound across her collarbone for her effort. It had not been enough. They had taken Pip anyway. She had never found out what happened to him after that. She had carried that not knowing for 8 years. It sat inside her like a stone that had grown into the structure of her, part of the architecture of who she was. She did not speak about it. She did not let herself think about it at any length. But it was there, and some part of her had been answering it ever since, building her days around the specific act of being in the right place at the right time, being steady when steadiness mattered, being the one who stayed. She had not come to the palace because of Ilian. She had come because she needed work and the palace needed nursery staff. But somewhere in the first year she had understood that she was going to stay, not because the pay was fair, it was, and not because the work was easy, it was not. but because Ilian was a child in a palace full of adults who loved him in large, formal ways, and what he needed, quietly and constantly, was someone who knew how to simply be near. She was good at being near. It was, perhaps, the thing she was best at. She had thought sometimes in the years before the Night of the Arrows that her life was small. Not unhappy, she was not unhappy, but small, contained. She existed in the nursery and the lower staff corridors and the small garden behind the palace where she walked in the evenings after Ilian was asleep. She had a room the size of a large closet. She had 3 sets of clothing and 1 good pair of boots. She had a stack of books she was slowly working through, and a habit of waking before dawn and sitting in the dark for a while before the day started. She did not have rank, she did not have status. She had no mate, no family nearby, no particular place in the social order of the pack. She was, in the most literal sense, invisible to most of the wolves who lived in the palace. She served the king's son. She kept the nursery clean and safe and warm. She was reliable and she was quiet and she did not cause problems, and for most of the people around her, that was all she was. She had accepted this. It was not bitterness. She was not the kind of person who carried bitterness around like a flag, but it was a clear-eyed understanding of where she stood in the world and what she was permitted to expect from it. What she had not expected, and could not have prepared for, was the night the Ashblood clan decided to change the succession of the royal pack by removing its heir. She had not expected to matter. The window in the nursery had been left open because Ilian had asked her to. He liked the smell of the night air, which was different in autumn, cooler, with the smell of the pine trees that grew along the eastern wall, and sometimes, when the wind came from the right direction, the faint smell of the river 2 miles south. She had been sitting in the chair near the door, her book open in her lap, the oil lamp burning low on the far table, when she heard the first sound. It was not much of a sound, a scrape, brief and faint, from the direction of the window. The sound a boot sole makes on stone, the sound of someone being careful. She had looked up from her book. She had listened. And then she had moved. In the corridor outside the nursery, the night shift guards had been drawn south by a fire, a small fire, set deliberately in the stable near the east wing, just enough smoke to bring them running. It had taken 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, the window was the only way in. They had not expected anyone to be in the room who could do what Mara did. An Omega, in their calculations, was not a threat. An Omega was someone who would run or freeze or beg. An Omega was not someone who would pull the child from his bed in the half-second between the sound and the arrow, and then refuse to move, and refused to fall through everything that followed. They had been wrong about her. Not because she was stronger than they thought. She was not. She was exactly as strong as an Omega of her size and age was, which was not very strong at all against 4 trained fighters. But she was stubborn in a way that had nothing to do with strength. She was stubborn in the way that a river is stubborn, not because it is powerful, but because it does not stop. It does not choose to stop. Stopping is simply not part of what it is. She had held on. She had held on through the first arrow and the second and the third, and when the 4th one came, she had held on through that too. She had kept her arms around Ilian and her back to the men and her face against the top of his head, and she had held. And then the guards had come back and it was done. She did not remember being carried from the nursery. She did not remember the healer's examination, or the removal of the arrows, or the long night that followed. She did not remember any of it. She only knew what she had been told later, pieced together from Rafe's account, and the healer's notes, and the words Ilian said to anyone who would listen in the days after. Mara stayed, Mara held on, Mara did not let go. He said it to the kitchen staff. He said it to the ladies who came to check on him. He said it once, apparently directly to his father, in the middle of a formal council meeting that Callan had brought him to because there was no one to watch him, and the nursery felt wrong without her in it. Mara held on, Ilian had said, tugging on his father's sleeve. Callan had looked down at his son. Then he had looked up at the council, at the row of high-ranking wolves sitting along the long table with their opinions and their politics and their careful expressions. "We will continue this tomorrow," he had said, and stood up, and lifted Ilian into his arms and walked out. The council had not known what to make of that. They would have more to say about it soon enough. The healer's name was Dora, and she had been working in the Royal Pack's palace for 31 years. She had seen a great deal. She had pulled weapons from bodies that should not have survived the wounds, and she had watched bodies that should have survived decline anyway, because survival is not a simple thing and the human or wolf body has its own ideas about what it will and will not endure. She had not, in 31 years, seen anything quite like Mara. She worked through the night. She worked by lamplight with 2 young assistants, and she worked with the particular focused quiet of someone who has learned that efficiency and care are not opposites. She removed the 4 arrows one at a time, working in the order of urgency, the back first because the angle of it was most dangerous, then the side because of what lay beneath the ribs, then the shoulder, then the arm. Each removal was its own small crisis. The one in the back had gone deep. The one in the side had grazed something internal that required careful treatment. The shoulder arrow had shattered a small bone on its way through, and the pieces had to be found individually and cleared. The arm was the cleanest of the 4 and still took 40 minutes. By the time she finished, it was nearly dawn. The oil lamps had been replaced twice. One of the young assistants was sitting in the corner with her head in her hands, not from weakness but from exhaustion. Dora herself felt the kind of tiredness that lives behind the eyes and in the small bones of the back. She cleaned her instruments, she wrote her notes, she checked the bindings one final time. Then she went to the door, opened it, and looked at the man sitting on the floor in the corridor. Alpha King Callan had not sat down on the floor in the corridor because he lacked a chair. There were chairs nearby, several of them, the good kind with cushioned seats, kept in the antechamber for exactly this sort of occasion. He had sat on the floor because at some point during the night he had stopped being a king and become simply a man waiting to find out whether someone was going to live. He looked up at her. He had been looking at the door all night, on and off, and she had opened it 3 times to give him updates, and each time he had listened without speaking, his expression giving nothing away. He was very good at giving nothing away. It was, she supposed, a useful quality in a king. She said, "She is stable. The next 3 days will tell us more, but the worst is done." He was quiet for a moment. "The child," he said. He always called Ilian the child in formal settings, which Dora had always found interesting. "Ilian is unharmed," she said, "not a mark on him." Something moved through Callan's expression, a brief shift, there and gone, like a fish turning in deep water. He looked down at the floor for a moment, and when he looked up again his face was composed. "What are her chances?" he said. "Better than they should be," Dora said. "She is not a large woman and she took 4 serious wounds. Any one of them could have been the end of it, but she is holding, her body is not giving up." She paused. "I have seen wolves with 3 times her strength and half these injuries who did not last the night. She is holding in a way I cannot entirely explain on physical terms." Callan said nothing. "She will be in considerable pain when she wakes," Dora continued. "Recovery will be slow, months, not weeks. The arm may retain some weakness. The back injury will take the longest." She folded her hands in front of her. "She will need rest and quiet and consistent care. She should not be moved more than necessary." Callan stood up. He was a tall man, and when he stood in a corridor it was impossible to forget that, whatever else he was also an alpha. The particular quality of presence that came with the rank was something you felt rather than saw, like the pressure change before a storm. "She will have whatever she needs," he said. It was not said the way kings say things when they mean them as a formality. He said it the way a person says a fact. Dora looked at him for a moment. She had known Callan since he was 16 years old and his father was still king. She had known him when he was a young man learning what his rank meant and what it cost, when he had been married and when he had lost his wife, and when he had sat in a different corridor, in very different circumstances, waiting to find out whether 2 people were going to live and learning that one of them would not. She said she was sitting in the chair near the door when they came through the window. He looked at her. She was not sleeping, Dora said. She was reading. She heard them before the arrow came. She let that settle. She moved the child before the first arrow landed. Every wound she carries is from shielding him with her own body. Callan was very still. 4 trained men, he said, not a question. Rafe had already given him the full account, but he said it anyway, as if he needed to put the number in the air. 4 trained men, Dora said. He turned away. He walked to the small window at the end of the corridor and stood there for a moment, looking out at the pale beginning of the dawn. Then he said, without turning around, "Make sure she has the best room in the healing wing." "She already does," Dora said. He nodded once, his back still to her, and Dora went back inside, and the door closed, and the corridor was quiet. Rafe had been the head of the Royal Guard for 9 years. He was a compact, careful man with a broad face and a scar across his chin from a training accident 15 years ago, and he had, in 9 years, never once failed to secure the palace grounds on his watch. He had failed last night. He knew it, and the knowledge sat in him like a coal, hot and constant and not getting any smaller. He had been drawn south by the stable fire. He had taken 8 guards with him. He had left the nursery wing with the overnight pair, which was standard protocol, which had always been sufficient, which had always been enough. It had not been enough. The 2 overnight guards had been dealt with quietly before the men came through the window. They were both alive, which was something, but they had not raised any alarm, and the result was a gap. 4 men through a gap, 4 arrows in an Omega who was not supposed to be a last line of defense. He stood in the nursery now in the early morning light and looked at the pillow. The arrow was still in it. He had ordered it left in place so he could look at it. It had been meant for a 3-year-old boy's head, and it had found a pillow instead, because Mara had moved the child in the fraction of a second between the sound and the impact. He picked up the arrow carefully. He turned it over in his hands. It was a well-made piece, good wood, quality fletching, a clean, narrow head designed to carry through soft tissue at range, not a hunting arrow, a purpose-made one. He set it down and looked at the floor near the bed, where the scuff marks told the rest of the story. She had gone to her knees there, mid-room, and stayed on her knees, and the dark staining on the stone told him how long she had held that position. He was not an emotional man, generally speaking. Emotion in his line of work was something to be noted and then set aside, filed under process later, because allowing it in the moment made you slower, and slower got people killed. He had filed a great many things under process later over the years and processed very few of them. He stood in the nursery and looked at the floor and felt the coal burning in his chest, and thought about an Omega nursery worker who had done, alone and unarmed and in the dark, what 8 trained guards had not. He processed that one immediately. He did not wait. He was responsible for this palace. He was responsible for every life inside it. He had procedures and protocols and a staff of 42 wolves who followed them. And last night, those procedures and protocols and staff had failed, and the line between the king's son and the men who wanted him dead had been a single small woman in a night robe holding on through 4 arrows because there was no one else. He left the nursery and went to find his senior officers, and the meeting he called that morning was not a comfortable one. By mid-morning the palace knew. That was inevitable. Palaces are porous places, full of people who talk, and a story like this one moved fast. By the time the sun was fully up and the breakfast fires were lit in the main kitchen, every member of the domestic staff had heard some version of it. By midday the stable hands and the outer guard posts knew. By late afternoon, the version had traveled beyond the palace walls to the town that spread around it, growing in detail as it went. The versions varied. Some said she had fought them off with her bare hands. Some said there had been 6 men or 8. Some said the child had been hurt and she had carried him to safety through the corridor. One version, circulating in the lower kitchen, had her shifting and holding them at bay in wolf form for an hour. None of these versions were accurate. None of them needed to be. The core of the story was accurate, and the core was this: 4 men had come for the Alpha King's pup, and the Omega in the nursery had put herself between them, and she had not moved. The reactions to this fact were not uniform. In the lower staff quarters, the kitchens, the laundry rooms, the cleaning staff, the garden workers, the stable hands, the reaction was a kind of fierce, almost surprised pride. These were the Omegas and the low rankers, the ones who existed in the gaps of the palace's formal hierarchy. They knew Mara. Not well in most cases. She was quiet and kept to herself, but they knew her face, knew the way she nodded at people in the morning, knew the way she read to Elian in the garden on fine days, the 2 of them sharing a stone bench, his small head bent over a page he could not yet fully read. They knew what it meant that she had been there instead of somewhere higher on the status ladder. They knew what it meant that she had been the one to hold. Several of them left things outside the door of the healing wing that morning. A small bunch of autumn flowers, taken from the palace garden with permission nobody had given but nobody had the heart to refuse. A small carved wooden figure, a wolf clumsily made, clearly a personal item, left by one of the stable boys who had been 3 years old himself when his father was killed in a border skirmish, and had grown up knowing exactly what it meant to be small and left unprotected. A folded length of blue cloth from one of the laundry workers, who had no particular reason to give it and no explanation when asked, only a shrug and a turn back. Dora noticed these things accumulating outside the door. She did not remove them. In the upper ranks of the palace, the senior officers, the high council members, the nobles who kept apartments in the West Wing and attended the formal functions and sat in on packed decisions, the reaction was more complicated. Most of them were not cruel, most of them were not even consciously unkind, but they operated within a framework of hierarchy that was old and deeply embedded, a framework in which rank was the lens through which all acts were interpreted, and what Mara had done in that framework was deeply unusual. Not wrong, exactly, no one who said it out loud would call it wrong, but unusual in ways that made people uncomfortable. An Omega had done what the Royal Guard had not. An Omega had functionally been the only thing standing between the heir and the men sent to kill him. An Omega's body now bore 4 wounds that were, by any reckoning, wounds sustained in defense of the royal bloodline. If they acknowledged that directly, they had to think about what it meant. They had to think about the hierarchy, and the questions the hierarchy could not comfortably answer. Why was she the only one there? What did it say that an Omega nursery worker had been more effective than trained fighters? What did a rank even mean if this was possible? These questions moved through the upper palace like smoke under a door, present, uncomfortable, impossible to entirely ignore. The High Counselor, a sharp-faced older wolf named Aldrich, had been the first to voice the discomfort directly. He had said it in the antechamber off the main hall, to 3 other council members, not loudly but with the particular confidence of a man who expects to be agreed with. It is a remarkable thing, but let us not build a legend out of a panic response. The woman acted on instinct. We should be grateful and move on. 2 of the 3 had nodded. The third, a younger counselor named Petra, had not. She took 4 arrows, Petra said, and stayed upright through all of them. That is not a panic response. That is a decision made 4 times. Aldrich had looked at her. She is an Omega, he said. Without training, without standing, without the physical capacity for sustained combat. Whatever she did last night, it was not. It was enough, Petra said. She was younger than Aldrich by 20 years and less politically careful. It was, in fact, exactly enough. The exchange had ended there, the way many such exchanges end, not with resolution but with silence, each side retreating to their position, waiting. It was not the last time that conversation would happen, not even close. And in the healing wing, behind a closed door, through all of it, the talk, the tokens at the door, the gathering discomfort of the upper ranks, the growing story in the town below the palace walls, Mara lay still and held on, her breath slow and even, her face peaceful in a way it rarely was when she was awake. She did not know any of it yet. She was not there for any of it. She was somewhere else, somewhere quiet, somewhere the pain had not yet reached. The bookmark was still not in the book. The fox story was still unfinished. She would get back to it. She held on. The Ashblood clan had sent their messenger on the 2nd day. He arrived at the palace gate on horseback, alone, wearing the Ashblood colors, dark gray with a red border, as if he wanted to be seen. As if arriving openly, in daylight, was a kind of statement. He carried a sealed letter, and he handed it to the gate officer with the serene expression of a man who is very confident in whoever is behind him. Rafe received the letter first, as was protocol. He broke the seal in his office with 2 of his officers present and read it twice before he let himself react. Then he folded it, tucked it into his coat, and went to find the king. The letter was not an apology. It was not a claim of responsibility dressed in diplomatic language. It was direct in the way that cruelty sometimes is, a precise, stripped of all softness, designed to cause the maximum effect in the minimum number of words. It said the heir should have died. The next attempt will be better prepared. Rafe handed it to Callan without comment. Callan read it. His expression did not change. He set it down on the table with a steadiness that was almost unnerving, not the steadiness of a man who does not feel the impact, but the steadiness of a man who has decided in advance how he will carry it. He looked at Rafe. They failed, he said. Whatever they say now, they failed. Yes, Rafe said. Because of her. It was not a question. Rafe said yes anyway. Callan looked at the letter again. His jaw was set in the way it set when he was making a decision that he had already arrived at and was simply locating the words for. Double the nursery guard, he said. Immediately. I want 2 wolves in the room and 2 outside the door and 2 at the corridor entrance. Nothing is standard protocol from this moment forward. Yes, sir. And I want the Ashblood border situation on the table by end of day. Every intelligence report from the last 3 months. I want to know who sent that letter and from where. It is already being prepared. Callan nodded, then he said, how is the alien taking it? Rafe hesitated for a fraction of a second. He is asking for Mara, he said. Something moved through Callan's face. He cannot be with her yet. No, not yet. Dora has been clear on that. The healing wing is quiet and needs to stay quiet. Rafe paused. He is not sleeping well. I know, Callan said. He did know. He had been in Ilian's room twice in the night, both times to find his son awake and wide-eyed in the dark, doing the quiet, contained version of distress that a 3-year-old develops when he has been frightened badly but has decided, for reasons of his own, not to cry about it. The first time, Callan had sat on the edge of the bed and put his hand on Ilian's back and stayed there until the small body relaxed under his palm. The second time, Ilian had looked up at him and said in a perfectly level voice, "She held on, Papa." "I know," Callan had said. "She didn't let go." "I know." Ilian had considered this for a moment. Then he had turned over and closed his eyes, apparently satisfied that his father understood the important facts and had gone back to sleep. Callan had sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time after that. He had thought about Sira, in the way he thought about her not directly, because thinking about her directly was still something he could only do for short intervals, like looking at a light that is very bright. He thought about her the way you notice a missing piece in a room you know well, not by looking at the gap, but by feeling the shape of it constantly. He thought about what she would have done if she had been in that room. He thought about it with the particular unfairness of a grief that is still very close. Ilian had been 3 for 6 weeks, which meant Callan had spent almost his son's entire life being both parents at once, which was a task he performed competently and without complaint, and which was, in the private hours, absolutely exhausting. He thought about how Ilian had said she held on, with the same tone other children used to say Mama came, or Papa fixed it. The voice of a child reporting that the thing they needed to be true had been true. He thought about Mara, who he had barely spoken to in 3 years of her working in the palace. He knew her face. He knew that Ilian called for her constantly, and that she was the one who read to him, and that she had some old scar on her collarbone that Ilian had mentioned once in passing in the way children mention things they consider important. He had passed her in corridors. He had seen her in the garden with Ilian. He had 3 months ago said good morning to her as she carried a tray past the library door, and she had said good morning back, and that was the longest direct exchange they had ever had. And now she was in the healing wing with 4 wounds, and his son slept knowing she had not let go, and the Ashblood clan had sent a letter saying they would try again. He picked up the letter, he folded it precisely and handed it back to Rafe. "I will read the intelligence reports at 4th hour," he said. "Get them ready." "Yes, sir," Rafe said. Callan turned to the window. Outside, the morning was grey and cool, the palace courtyard empty at this hour, the pennants above the east gate moving slightly in the wind. It was an ordinary morning in every visible way. The courtyard looked the same as it always did. The pennants moved the way they always moved. Everything was different. He did not say that out loud, because there was no one to say it to, and because saying it would not change anything, and because what he had learned in the first months after Sira died, in the long work of staying upright under a weight that was not evenly distributed, was that the truth of a thing did not require an audience to be real. Everything was different. He had known it when he walked into the nursery at first light and seen the arrow in the pillow and the marks on the floor. He had known it when Dora told him she had held through all 4. He had known it again differently when Ilian said she held on, Papa, in the dark, and went back to sleep with the confidence of a child who has been caught. He had a responsibility to that. He was not sure yet what the shape of it was, but he was sure he had it, and he would find out what it required. He always found out what things required. It was, in many ways, the only thing he was entirely confident about. She woke on the 7th day. Not all at once, not dramatically. It was a slow surfacing, first the sensation of weight, the specific heaviness of a body that has been lying still for too long. Then pain arriving in careful stages, each one introducing itself before the next, the shoulder first, then the side, then the arm, The back last and most insistently, a deep, settled ache that told her immediately that whatever had happened was not something she was going to shake off quickly. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was pale stone, smooth and close, and the light coming through the window was the gray-white of late morning in autumn. She could smell the herbs the healers used, something green and bitter that she recognized without being able to name. She could hear distantly the sound of the palace going about its day, footsteps in the corridor, the faint clang of something metal in a room farther away, the sound of a door. She turned her head. This took some effort. The muscles of her neck were stiff and she moved slowly, the way a careful person moves in a dark room. Dora was sitting in a chair near the window with a book in her lap, and she looked up the moment Mara moved. She had been a healer for 30 years, and she had developed over those years the particular awareness of a person who watches over sleeping things, alert even when she appeared to be reading, ready even when her eyes were on the page. "Good morning," Dora said. She said it calmly, without the rushed brightness that some people use around patients who wake from something serious, the performance of relief that sometimes made people feel worse rather than better, because it reminded them how close the other direction had been. Mara said nothing for a moment. She was taking inventory, not dramatically, just the quiet, methodical assessment of someone who grew up understanding that you do not know what you are dealing with until you have looked at all of it. 4 wounds, all of them bandaged, all of them present in the dull, persistent language of bodies that have been through something and are telling you about it continuously. "How long?" she said. Her voice came out rough, which did not surprise her. 7 days, Dora said. Mara closed her eyes briefly, then she opened them and said, "Ilian." "Unharmed," Dora said, "not a mark on him." She watched Mara absorb this. "He has been asking for you every day, multiple times each day in his particular way." Mara almost smiled at that. She knew the particular way. It was the way he asked for things he considered settled facts, not as a question, but as a statement of current incomplete reality, as if the world simply needed to be informed that the situation required correcting. "He will know you are awake before the day is out," Dora said. "The palace talks." "Has he been sleeping?" Dora paused for a fraction of a second. "Better the last 2 days," she said, which told Mara that the first 5 had not been good. She lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 7 days she had not been present for. She was not good at absence. She was not good at the gap created by a thing she had not done, a place she had not been. The knowledge that Ilian had spent 5 nights struggling to sleep, while she lay insensible in a room 2 corridors away, sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. "What do you need first?" Dora said. Mara thought about this practically. "Water," she said. "Then I need to know the full situation." She paused. "And there is a book in the nursery, brown cover, a story about a fox. I left it without a bookmark." Dora looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a healer who has seen many patients wake from serious injuries, and has learned that you can tell a great deal about a person from the first thing they ask about. "I will see to all 3, she said. The news that Mara was awake moved through the palace in the way that the news of her injury had moved, fast, and with the unstoppable momentum of a story that people have been waiting on. By midday, every person who had left a token outside the healing wing door in the past 7 days had heard it, and the door now had a small crowd of staff passing by it on errands that did not strictly require them to pass by it. Dora had them moved along politely but firmly. Mara was awake, but awake was not the same as recovered, and she needed quiet, and the next 3 days were still critical, and she was not receiving visitors. She said this to approximately 15 people in the course of 2 hours, with the patient repetition of a person who knows it will need to be said again. Callan received the news in the middle of a briefing with his intelligence officers. He heard it and he said nothing, and he returned his attention to the map spread across the table, the eastern borders, the Ashblood territories, the particular constellation of threats that had been building for months and had finally expressed itself through a palace window in the dark. He filed it under process later and continued the briefing. But he processed it almost immediately, which was unlike him. He thought about the conversation he would need to have with Mara. He thought about what it should contain and what it should not, and what the right timing for it was, and what he owed her and what she would accept. He thought about the fact that he did not know her, that she had been in his palace for 3 years, and he did not know the first thing about her beyond the fact that Ilian loved her and she was reliable and she kept to herself. He thought about what Aldrich had said to him that morning in the council antechamber, the careful, considered opinion of a man who had spent decades being careful and considered. The woman acted admirably under extreme circumstances. We should ensure she recovers well and compensate her appropriately. There is no need to make more of it than it is. Callan had looked at Aldrich. More of it than it is, he had repeated. The incident should not be allowed to become a political matter, Aldrich had said, with the slight emphasis on political that suggested he had already decided what category it belonged in and was now managing the placement. An Omega's act, however brave, does not change the structure of the pack. I see, Callan had said. He had said nothing else. He had walked out of the antechamber and gone directly to the intelligence briefing, and Aldrich had watched him go with the expression of a man who is not entirely sure whether he has been heard. He had been heard, Callan heard everything. He simply did not always respond immediately, because he had learned that the space between hearing and responding was where the important thinking happened. He thought about Aldrich's word, appropriate compensation, an appropriate response. The word carried the entire weight of the hierarchy in it. This is what an Omega's act is worth, carefully calibrated so that nothing shifts, so that everything stays where it has always been. He thought about that word for the rest of the briefing. Ilian came to know Mara was awake the way he came to know most things, not through a formal notification, but through the specific attention he paid to the palace's emotional atmosphere. He was 3 years old, but he had grown up in a place where the moods of adults were weather patterns, and he had learned to read them before he could read words. He noticed the kitchen staff standing a little straighter. He noticed Rafe, who passed through the nursery twice a day as part of his rounds, pausing at the door with an expression that was marginally less tight than it had been for the past week. He noticed that the lady who brought his lunch, a cheerful young woman named Kit who always smelled of bread, was smiling in a specific way, a private smile she was not directing at him but which was present and warm in the room. He tugged on Kit's sleeve. Mara is awake, he said. Kit blinked and then she laughed, surprised, clear laughter, the kind that comes out before you can decide whether to keep it in. How did you know that? Ilian did not answer. He turned back to his lunch with the focused attention of a person who has received the information he needed and is now returning to the task at hand. He ate more lunch that day than he had eaten in the previous 7 days combined. Kit noted this when she returned the tray and reported it to Dora, who wrote it down in her notes with the care of someone who understood that even small observations mattered. Ilian asked that afternoon to go to the healing wing. The answer was not yet. Dora's instructions were clear. Mara needed quiet and rest, and a 3-year-old, however beloved, was not either of those things. Ilian accepted this with the surface calm he had been deploying all week, the particular composure of a small person who has decided that the adults are going to do what they are going to do, and that the appropriate response is patience, even when patience is very difficult. He asked again the next morning. The answer was not yet. He asked his father that evening after supper, using the lever of direct eye contact that he had discovered worked more reliably with Callan than with anyone else. His father was hard to move in most directions, but when Ilian looked at him directly and asked a thing plainly, something in Callan's face shifted in ways it did not shift for council members or military officers. "When can I see Mara?" Ilian said. Callan looked at his son. He was holding Ilian on his lap, which was where Ilian had placed himself after supper, as he had every evening since the incident, not clinging, not distressed, simply there, present, ensuring the proximity. "When Dora says it is safe," Callan said. "Tomorrow. Perhaps." Ilian considered this. "Today she woke up," he said. "I heard it in the kitchen." He paused. "She will want to know I am all right." "I have told her," Callan said. "She knows." Ilian tilted his head. "Did she ask about me first?" Something in Callan's chest moved. He had gotten the full account from Dora, the first word Mara had spoken when she woke, the question that had come before the water, before the situation report, before her own assessment of her wounds. "Yes," he said. Ilian nodded. He seemed satisfied by this in a way that went beyond the simple fact of it, as if this confirmed something he had already decided was true and which he was glad to have verified. He leaned back against his father's chest and was quiet for a while, and Callan kept his hand on the small back and felt the warmth of his son and thought about the question he had asked Dora the night Mara was brought in. Did she know what she was doing, or did she panic? She had been sitting in the chair, reading. She had heard them before the arrow came. She had moved Elian in the half-second between the sound and the shot. She had then absorbed 4 arrows without releasing the child. 4 decisions, each one made after the one before it. Not a single panicked response, but 4 separate choices in the dark, with increasing pain and increasing danger. She had known exactly what she was doing. He thought about what it meant that someone like that had been in the nursery when no one else was there. He thought about what it meant that the palace's system, its ranks, its guards, its protocols and procedures had failed, and an Omega nursery worker with no status and no formal combat role had been the contingency that worked. He thought about Aldrich's word again, appropriate. He thought about the people who had left tokens outside the healing wing door. He had been told about them, the flowers, the wooden wolf, the folded cloth. He had been told that the lower staff had been doing it for days, and that the door had acquired a kind of shrine quality, quiet and earnest and entirely unofficial. He thought about Petra's words in the antechamber, 4 decisions, each one made after the one before. He thought about the Ashblood letter, which was still on his desk, which he had read 4 more times since he first received it. He thought about the intelligence reports and the border situation and the fact that the Ashblood clan was not finished, which meant this was not finished, which meant the question of what had protected his son and what would protect him next was not an abstract one. Elian had gone still on his lap, the slow heaviness of a child drifting towards sleep. Callan sat with him in the quiet of the evening room and held his son and thought about what he was going to do. He had not decided yet precisely, but the direction was clear. It had been clear, he realized, from the moment Dora told him she held through all 4. He had simply been giving himself time to make sure it was the right direction and not merely the emotional one. He had now had 7 days to be sure, and he was sure. There was going to be a conversation that the council would not like. There was going to be a decision that Aldrich would call inappropriate, and that Aldrich would be wrong about, and that Callan was going to make anyway. He would wait until Mara was stronger. He would wait until she could stand and speak and be present for it. She had earned that much at the very least. She had earned the right to be standing when what happened next happened. He would wait. Outside the palace, the autumn wind moved through the pine trees along the eastern wall, and the pennants above the main gate shifted and steadied, and the town below the walls went about its evening, and the story of the woman who took 4 arrows for the pup moved from mouth to mouth, growing slowly in the telling, taking on the weight of a thing that is becoming something larger than the event that started it. Mara did not know any of this yet. She was asleep again in the healing wing, and the sleep this time was different from the previous 7 days, not the deep, removed unconsciousness of a body in crisis, but the lighter, more present sleep of someone who is beginning the slow work of returning. The bookmark had been placed in the Fox book. Dora had done it herself, pressing the page carefully flat, choosing a thin strip of ribbon from her own supply. It was a small thing. It was also not a small thing at all. On the 8th day, Rafe came to the healing wing. Dora let him in because she understood from his expression that this was not a social visit and not a formal one either. He was not there in his capacity as head of the Royal Guard. He was there as a man who had something he needed to say. He sat in the chair beside Mara's bed, the same chair Dora had been sitting in, and he looked at Mara with the direct, slightly uncomfortable look of someone who is not accustomed to this kind of conversation, but has decided to have it anyway. Mara looked back at him. Her color was better than the day before, and she had managed to sit partially upright that morning, which Dora had noted in her records with quiet satisfaction. "I want to say something," Rafe said. Mara waited. He was quiet for a moment, not looking for words. He had the words, she could see that, but making sure the weight of them was right before he put them out. "I left the nursery wing with 2 guards, he said. "Standard protocol, it has always been enough." He stopped. It was not enough. Mara said nothing. "That is my failure," Rafe said. "Not the protocol, not the guards, mine. I'm responsible for this palace and everything inside it, and I left a gap, and you—" He stopped again. His jaw worked slightly. "What you did was not something I can account for in any way that makes it feel like less than it is. I will not try." He looked at her directly, "I am sorry," he said, "not as a formality, I am sorry." She held his gaze. He was a proud man, careful about dignity, careful about what he showed to the people who served under him. This cost him something. She could see that clearly. "You had no reason to believe the protocol would fail," she said. "No," he said, "but it did." "Yes," she said. They were quiet for a moment, not an uncomfortable quiet, the quietness of two people who have established that they understand each other and do not need to fill the space. "I have changed the protocol," he said then. 6 guards on the nursery, constant, not rotational. Triple the corridor coverage overnight. He paused. "I have also implemented a secondary alert system for diversionary incidents. Any fire or breach on the grounds triggers immediate lockdown of the nursery wing regardless of where the primary threat appears to be." Myra nodded. "It should have existed already," he said. "Probably," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. He stood and looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has said what he came to say and is now deciding whether he needs to say anything else. He decided not. He gave her a small nod, not a bow, something different, something between an acknowledgement and a gesture of genuine respect, and he left. Dora came back in and picked up her book. "He is not an easy man," Dora said, not looking up. "No," Mara said. "He has been in the corridor more nights than you know." Mara looked at the door. Outside it the tokens were still there. She had not seen them yet, but Dora had described them, the flowers, the wooden wolf, the blue cloth. More had been added since she woke. A folded piece of paper with something drawn on it. A small stone polished smooth. A dried sprig of something that smelled like the garden. She was not sure what to do with any of it. She was not by nature someone who knew how to receive things. She was better with giving them, the steady presence, the book, the bookmark, the warm room, and the steady voice. She did not know exactly how to hold the fact that people she barely knew had been outside her door for 7 days, leaving pieces of their days there. She thought she would need to learn. She thought a great many things were about to require learning. She lay back in the bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the weight of what was coming toward her, not with dread, but with the particular attentiveness of someone who has survived something and now understands that surviving is only the first part of the story. The second part was going to be harder in different ways. She was ready for it anyway. She was, as it turned out, the kind of person who stayed ready. She always had been. Callan came on the 9th day. He came in the morning before the council briefing, before the day's paperwork and decisions stacked up into the particular weight that a king's morning always became. He came early because early meant quiet, and because he had been thinking about this visit for 9 days and had decided that it should not be formal, not attended, not witnessed and recorded and later discussed in antechambers. He told no one he was going. He walked to the healing wing himself, without escort, which was unusual enough that the 2 guards in the corridor outside the door looked at him with the carefully neutral expressions of people who are registering something unexpected and have decided their job is to pretend otherwise. He knocked, which was also unusual. Kings do not typically knock at doors in their own palace. He did it anyway because the door belonged, for the time being, to Dora's space, and Dora's space had its own rules. Dora opened it. She looked at him without surprise, which meant she had either expected this or was very good at appearing unshaken, probably both. "She is awake," Dora said, "and she is able to sit up today, which I am considering an achievement worth noting." She stepped back from the door. "I will be in the next room, call me if she tires." She left without further ceremony, which he appreciated. He walked into the room. It was a good room, the best in the healing wing, as he had asked. It had a window that faced the garden, and the morning light was coming through it now at a low angle, laying a pale stripe across the stone floor. The room smelled of the healer's herbs, and underneath that, the faint, cool scent of autumn air from the partly open window. Mara was sitting up in the bed. Partly sitting, more accurately, she was propped against a stack of pillows at an angle that was clearly the compromise between what she wanted to do, sit fully upright, and what her back would currently permit. She had bandaging visible at the collar of her robe and along her left arm. She looked pale and thinner than he remembered, and her hair was loose, which was different from the way he always saw her in the palace, where she wore it pulled back. She looked, he thought, like a person who had been through something and was presently in the process of deciding what it meant and what they were going to do next. She looked at him when he came in, and she did not look away, and she did not perform anything, no surprise, no deference, no anxious straightening up that was probably beyond her physically anyway. She just looked at him the way a person looks at another person when they have decided to be present for whatever is about to happen. He pulled the chair to the side of the bed and sat down. He was aware, distantly, of how this would look to anyone watching, the Alpha King, sitting beside the bed of an Omega nursery worker, just the two of them in a room. He found he did not particularly care. "How is the pain?" he said. "Manageable," she said. Her voice was still slightly rough but clearer than the day before. "Dora says the back will take the longest. She has told me the same." He looked at her for a moment. He had prepared words for this in the way he prepared for most things, thinking through them in advance, ordering them, identifying what he actually wanted to say as opposed to what the situation seemed to call for. He had 3 different versions of this conversation ready. He had decided on the walk here that he was going to use none of them. "I have said good morning to you once," he said, "in 3 years." She blinked. She had not expected that. "In the library corridor," he said, "3 months ago you were carrying a tray." "I remember," she said slowly. "That is the longest conversation we have had before today." She did not say anything. She was watching him with that steady attention that he was starting to understand was simply how she was not guarded, not performing calm, but genuinely here, paying attention. "I have a son who loves you," he said, "who has been saying your name every day for 9 days with the certainty of someone reporting a fact that the world has not yet caught up with." He paused. "And I know almost nothing about you." She was quiet for a moment. "There is not much to know," she said. "I doubt that," he said. She looked at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, a slight recalibration. The way a person adjusts when they realize the conversation they are in is different from the one they expected. "What would you like to know?" she said. He thought about it. He had many things he could ask, practical things, background things, the information gathering that a king performs when he is making decisions about a person. He had asked some of those questions already, quietly, through channels. He knew where she came from, roughly. He knew how long she had been here, what her duties were, that she had no family in the city. He asked a different question. "Why did you stay," he said, "in the nursery when they came in?" She did not answer immediately. She looked at the window, at the stripe of morning light on the floor, and she was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was thinking rather than when she was avoiding something. "Where would I have gone?" she said finally. "Out the door," he said. The door was clear. They came through the window. "You could have run." "Ilian could not run," she said. "He was asleep." "You could have taken him with you." She shook her head very slightly. "I heard the sound before the first arrow. I did not know how many there were or whether there were more in the corridor. Running could have taken us toward danger." She paused. Staying and covering him gave him the best chance. "You calculated that," he said, "in the half-second you had." "I have thought about this kind of situation before," she said. The words were simple and flat, and they carried a weight that was too large for their size. He looked at her. She did not elaborate. That was deliberate. He could see that it was deliberate. "The scar," he said. Her hand moved slightly toward her collarbone, a reflex. She stopped. She looked at him steadily. "Ilian told you." "He mentioned it once in passing. He does that, mentions things he finds important." He paused. "I am not asking you to explain it." "Good," she said. "I am only saying that I think I understand, a little, why this kind of thinking was not new to you." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window again. When she looked back at him, there was something in her expression that was not soft exactly, but open, a small opening, like a door that has not been fully closed. "I failed once," she said. "I was not going to fail again." He held that. He did not push it. He let it sit in the room between them with the weight it deserved. "I want to do something," he said, "for what you did, not as a formality, not a compensation of the appropriate kind." He said the last 2 words with a very slight dryness that told her he had heard something like them recently and had formed a view about them, something that reflects what actually happened. She looked at him with the careful attention of someone who has learned not to assume. "I am going to give you a rank," he said, "a formal rank in the royal pack with full standing and recognition, the rank of Royal Shield." He watched her face. "It has been held before once 2 generations ago by a wolf who saved the life of the Alpha's heir. It has not been held since. I am going to give it to you." Mara was very still. That is not a small thing, she said. No, he said, it is not. The council will say what they say, he said. I have been a king for 11 years, I know what the council will say before they say it. He looked at her directly. I am not asking for permission. She looked at him. He could see that she was doing the particular work of someone who has been told something large, and is managing the temptation to minimize it, to wave it away, to say it is not necessary, to retreat into the easier position of having no expectations and therefore no exposure. He had seen that work in people before. He recognized it. I want to be clear about something, he said. This is not charity. This is not a reward that is larger than the act warranted. What you did staying in that room with 4 men and no weapons and no backup and 4 wounds, there is no rank that is proportional to that. There is no thing I can give you that equals it. He paused. But I can make sure you are never invisible again. I can make sure that everyone in this palace, everyone in this pack knows who you are and what you did and what you are. He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression he could not fully read. It was not happy, exactly. It was not moved in the way people are moved by gifts or honors. It was something more complex, the expression of someone who has been seen by a person whose seeing actually matters and is not entirely sure what to do with that. You should think about it, she said. The council will fight you. I know. It could become political in ways that are not useful to you. I know. I am an Omega, she said. It was not a self-deprecating statement. It was the flat delivery of a relevant fact, the way an engineer reports a constraint. I know what you are, he said. She looked at him, he looked back. The morning light shifted slightly as a cloud moved somewhere above, and the stripe on the floor changed angle and the room was very quiet. And in that quiet, something settled between them, not a decision, not a resolution, but a recognition of some kind, a mutual acknowledgement of a thing that both of them could see clearly and that would require navigating. All right, she said. He nodded once. They stayed in that quiet for another moment, and then Callan stood and replaced the chair and moved toward the door. At the door he stopped, not turning back, just pausing with his hand near the frame. He will come to see you tomorrow, he said. Dora has agreed. She did not say anything, but he heard behind him the small exhale of a person releasing something they have been holding. He walked out into the corridor, and the door closed behind him, and the 2 guards looked at him with their carefully neutral expressions, and he walked back toward the east wing and the day that was waiting for him. He did not know at that moment what was coming. He did not know how large the fight was going to be, or how personal it would become, or how far the Ashblood clan's next move would reach, or what it was going to cost everyone in that palace before it was done. He knew what he had decided. He knew that decisions, once made with clarity, had to be followed through with the same clarity, or they were not decisions at all, they were just intentions, which were worth nothing without the will to hold them. He had the will he always had. He walked back to the east wing, and the day began. Aldrich was in the antechamber when Callan arrived at the council hall. He had, perhaps, been waiting. He had the practiced patience of a man who understands the value of being the first voice a king hears in the morning, and he had been the council's senior member for long enough to know that the first voice often shapes the day. I heard you went to the healing wing, Aldrich said. I did, Callan said, moving through the antechamber toward his office. Alone, Aldrich said. This was the actual point, not that he had gone, but how. Yes, Aldrich followed him, because that was something Aldrich did. He followed correctly at the right distance, with the right combination of deference and persistence that made it clear he intended to say what he had come to say. There is a concern, Aldrich said, about the signal being sent. Callan stopped at his desk. He stood behind it without sitting. What signal? That the incident in the nursery is being elevated in a way that may not be useful. Aldrich's tone was the careful one, the moderate one, the voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while delivering an unreasonable thing. The woman performed a brave act, no one disputes that, but the attention the event is receiving from the staff, from the town, and now from you is beginning to take on a quality that may create expectations the structure of the pack cannot support. Callan looked at him. What expectations? That rank does not matter, Aldrich said. That bloodline does not matter. That an Omega acting above her station should be. rewarded in ways that place her above wolves who have spent their lives earning their positions. Callan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the 4 arrows. He thought about the small figure curled around his son in the dark, and the marks on the nursery floor, and the way Ilian said she held on in the same voice he would use to report something as simple as the sky being blue. The guards who earned their positions, Callan said, were not in the nursery. Aldrich's expression did not change, but something behind it tightened. The protocol. Failed, Callan said. I know, Rafe knows, everyone knows. He sat down now. He placed both hands flat on the desk, not aggressively, just deliberately. There is going to be a formal recognition of what Mara did. I have spoken to her about it this morning. The details will be announced when she is strong enough to stand for them. Aldrich was quiet for a moment that was carefully measured. The council will have views. I expect them to. There are questions of precedent. Yes, sir. And of what this means for the broader structure. Aldrich, Callan said, not sharply, quietly, but with the particular weight of a man who has reached the end of a portion of conversation and is indicating that clearly. I have told you what I am going to do. I am telling you now so that you have time to prepare your thoughts and bring them formally to the council where I will hear them, but I am not asking for agreement. Aldrich looked at him. He was a proud man and a smart one, and he had the sense to recognize a closed decision when he was standing in front of one. He straightened slightly. I will prepare my thoughts, he said. Good, Callan said. Send in the morning reports. Aldrich left. The door closed behind him with the particular soft firmness of a door closed by someone who is unhappy but too disciplined to slam it. Callan sat at his desk for a moment in the quiet. He thought about Mara saying, all right, just those 2 words, nothing more after everything he had said. No performance, no gratitude, no modesty, just a clear acknowledgement of a thing agreed upon. He thought about Ilian, who had been saying her name for 9 days with the patience of a child who understood that the world would eventually catch up. He thought about the Ashblood letter still on his desk, its threat still present, its next move still unknown. He picked up the morning reports and began to read. Petra came to the healing wing that afternoon. She came officially as a council member performing a courtesy visit, which gave it the appropriate framing, a senior member of the pack hierarchy acknowledging an injured staff member. Nothing that could be called improper or disproportionate. Dora let her in, because Dora was developing a clear sense for who Mara needed to see and who could wait, and Petra was in the first category. Petra was 42 years old, and she had been on the High Council for 6 years, and she had the look of a person who had spent those 6 years being the most junior voice in the room while being frequently the most accurate one. She was not a large woman, but she was precise. Everything about her was precise, from the way she dressed to the way she spoke to the way she moved through a room. She sat down in the chair and looked at Mara. I want to be direct, she said, which was, in Mara's experience, almost always a useful way to open a conversation. Please, Mara said. There is going to be a fight, Petra said. Over what Callan intends to do. Aldrich will lead it, and he will have several of the other senior members, and it will not be gentle. She paused. I am on the other side of it. I wanted you to know that. Mara looked at her. Why? Because you should know who is in your corner before the room gets loud, Petra said simply. And because the argument being made against you is not about merit, it is about fear. And fear-based arguments are best countered by people who understand what they are really saying. What are they really saying? Mara said. Petra was quiet for a moment. She had the precise, careful look of someone choosing words not for softness but for accuracy. They are saying if an Omega can do this and be formally recognized for it, then everything we have said about rank and bloodline and structure is a story we told ourselves. And they are not wrong. She paused. It is a story we told ourselves. Most of our hierarchies are. That does not mean they are useless. Structure serves purposes. But it means they are not sacred. And some people have built their entire sense of themselves on the assumption that they are. Mara said nothing for a moment. She was looking at the window. I did not do it to challenge anything, she said. I know, Petra said. That is in fact the most challenging thing about it. They looked at each other. Mara felt, for the first time since she had woken, something that was not quite warmth but was in the same neighborhood, the recognition of a person who was telling her the truth without dressing it. Rest, Petra said, standing. You will need to be strong for what is coming. I am usually stronger than I look, Mara said. Petra almost smiled. Yes, she said, I am counting on it. She left and the room was quiet again, and the afternoon light lay across the floor in its slow, steady way, and Mara closed her eyes and let herself rest. She would need it, Petra was not wrong about that. Elian came on the 10th day. He came in the morning holding his father's hand, wearing the small boots he always wore that made a distinct sound on the stone floors, not quite a clomping but close, the determined step of a child who knows where he is going. He walked through the healing wing corridor with the focused intensity of someone executing a plan that has been held in reserve for too long and is now finally being allowed forward. Dora opened the door and stood aside, and Elian walked in. He stopped just inside the door. Mara was sitting up in bed, truly sitting up now, not the propped angle of the days before but upright, with the effort it took visible in the set of her jaw and the slight stiffness of her shoulders. She had managed to put her hair up that morning, which had cost her 20 minutes and 2 rest stops, but she had done it. She looked, as Dora had told her when she handed her the ribbon, like herself. Elian looked at her from the doorway. He had his father's stillness sometimes, the ability to be in a place without fidgeting, to look at a thing and simply look at it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked across the room and climbed up onto the bed beside her, with the total confidence of someone doing an entirely obvious thing, and he put his head against her right side, the less damaged side, which she noticed and thought was probably not an accident, and he was quiet. She put her right arm around him. The left was still in a partial brace, and she kept it still. She put her right arm around him and held him against her and did not say anything. They stayed like that. Callan stood in the doorway. He had let go of Elian's hand at the threshold, understanding that the door was his limit. He stood there and watched his son press himself against Mara's side with the trust of a creature who has found the thing it needed to find, and something in his chest did what it had been doing in the dark, at intervals, for 10 days, that brief, deep movement, like a door opening into a place that had been closed. He had been present for many significant moments. He had watched borders be redrawn and alliances be made and enemies become more than they were. He had sat at bedsides and stood in council halls and made decisions that changed the shape of things. He was not a sentimental man, not in the surface way, not in the easy way. But he was standing in a doorway watching his 3-year-old son press his face against the side of a woman with 4 healing wounds, and holding so still it looked like breathing itself might disturb the moment, and he was aware with perfect clarity that this was one of the things he would carry for the rest of his life. Not the arrows, not the politics, not the Ashblood letter. This. Elian eventually lifted his head. You left the book open, he said. Mara looked at him. I know, I was going to put the bookmark in. Dora put it in, he said. She did, Mara said. Did you know where we stopped? Elian considered this. The fox found the river, he said. Not quite, she said. The fox found the river's edge. He hasn't reached the water yet. Elian frowned slightly. This was a distinction that mattered to him. Oh, he said. We'll read the rest when I come back. He looked at her. When is that? She glanced at Dora, who was standing near the wall with her arms folded, maintaining the expression of professional neutrality that she wore the way other people wore a uniform. 3 weeks, Dora said. If she does exactly what I say until then, which she will because she is a sensible person. 3 weeks, Elian repeated. He looked at Mara with the gravity of a child doing arithmetic. I can wait 3 weeks. That is very mature of you, Mara said. I know, Elian said without a trace of irony, because he was 3 and irony had not yet occurred to him. He stayed for an hour. He talked with the cheerful thoroughness of a child who has been storing up things to say, about the kitchen cat who had recently had a litter, about a new guard who had a very loud voice, about a picture he had drawn which he had left in the nursery and would bring tomorrow. He talked about the fox book and expressed specific concern for the fox's ability to cross the river, given that foxes in his experience did not typically swim voluntarily. Mara listened to all of it. She added occasional comments. She kept her right arm around him and let him talk, and the talking filled the room and drove the clinical quiet of the healing wing entirely out of it, replacing it with the particular warm noise of a child in a place where he felt safe. Callan left them to it after a few minutes, going back to the corridor with Dora, who leaned against the wall beside him and looked at the closed door. He is going to be all right, Dora said. Not about the boy. She said it in the tone of a statement about Mara. Yes, Callan said. Better than all right, probably. She paused. She has a remarkable constitution, not physically, I mean in the other sense, the kind that does not break easily. I know, Callan said. Dora looked at him with the frank assessment of a woman who has watched a great many people across a great many years and has few remaining illusions about what she sees. You are going to do something large, she said. Yes. Aldrich will fight you. I know. The council will be unpleasant about it. I expect so. Dora was quiet for a moment. Good, she said then. It should have been done a long time ago, not specifically this, but something like it. The pack has people in it who are worth more than their rank says, and everyone knows it and no one says it, and it has been a lie we all agreed to keep. She straightened. I am glad someone is going to stop keeping it. She went back down the corridor, and Callan stood outside the door and listened to Ilian's voice through the wood, steady and clear and full of the absolute confidence of a child who has been found, and he thought about what was coming and felt entirely certain of what he had decided. The Ashblood clan made their second move on the 14th day. It did not come through a window this time. It came through a letter, a second letter, handed openly to the gate officer as before, carried by a different messenger in the same dark grey and red. But this letter was not addressed to Callan. It was addressed to the High Council. Rafe intercepted it before it reached Aldrich. He brought it directly to Callan, unopened, which was protocol and also the right thing. Callan broke the seal and read it. The Ashblood clan had learned, through whatever channels they operated, that Callan intended to formally elevate the nursery worker. The letter expressed, in clear and calculated language, that this act would be interpreted as a display of instability. A king who elevates servants over warriors, who allows sentiment to override structure, was a king who could not be taken seriously as a ruler or a threat. The letter suggested that the pack might benefit from leadership that better understood the nature of power. It was not technically a declaration of war. It was something more slippery, a public pressure document designed to create a narrative before any response was possible. If Callan elevated Mara, they would use it as evidence of weakness. If he did not, they would have succeeded in stopping him through intimidation, and they would use that as evidence of a different kind of weakness. He set the letter down. He had been a king for 11 years. He had dealt with political pressure in many forms, from many directions. He had been tested and maneuvered and occasionally genuinely threatened, and he had developed, across those years, a very clear sense of the difference between pressure that came from a place of real power and pressure that came from bluster dressed up as power. The Ashblood clan was afraid. Not of him specifically, though that was part of it. They were afraid of the story that was forming around the nursery incident, the story of an Omega who had stood when the trained wolves had not, of a hierarchy that had been exposed as a fiction in one very specific and very visible moment. They were afraid of that story gaining weight and spreading, because that story, if it became large enough, would change things in ways that their own position depended on remaining unchanged. He was going to give that story exactly what it needed to grow. He picked up the letter and filed it in the evidence drawer. He wrote a brief note to Rafe, all intelligence gathered on the Ashblood clan's current position and resources to be compiled and ready by the end of the week. He wrote a second note to Petra, whose opinion he had come to value, asking for a meeting. Then he went back to his morning work, because a king's work does not pause for letters from people who want him to flinch. He did not flinch. The palace's domestic staff did not know about the second Ashblood letter. Most of them did not know about the first one. What they knew was what they saw every day, in the corridors and the kitchens and the gardens and the halls, the slow, steady gathering of a situation that had not yet declared itself, but that everyone could feel. They knew that the tokens outside the healing wing door had stayed. They knew that Rafe had put 6 guards on the nursery and that the guard presence throughout the palace had increased measurably. They knew that the council hall had been used every day for the past week, which was unusual. They knew that Aldrich had been seen moving through the palace with the particular expression he wore when he had decided something was important, which was the expression of a man who has decided to be right about something and is organizing the evidence accordingly. They knew that the king had gone to the healing wing alone on the 9th day and had been in there for a long time. They did not know what had been said, but they understood, in the way that people who spend their lives in the walls of a place understand things, that something was forming. that the act in the nursery had started a process that was not finished, and that the finishing of it was going to matter to all of them, not just to Mara. In the lower kitchens, a woman named Hilda, who had been making bread in the palace for 22 years, and who had the authority of great age and great competence and absolutely no formal rank, had said a thing on the 11th day that had been repeated throughout the lower staff with the quiet thoroughness of a truth that people had been waiting to hear articulated. She is one of us, and what happens to her is what happens to all of us. That is what this is. She had gone back to her bread, but the words had stayed. In the guard quarters, the younger members of Rafe's staff had their own version of it, less articulate but equally clear, a feeling that the woman in the healing wing was a kind of mirror, and that what her outcome was would tell them something true about the place they lived and worked and gave their loyalty to. In the council hall, the senior members had their version of it too, though they would not have described it the same way. For them it was simpler and less comfortable, a disruption, a precedent, a thing that once done could not be undone. They were right about that much. Whatever was coming could not be undone. Mara was in the healing wing, getting stronger by the day, reading the Fox book with Elian in the afternoons, doing the slow and unglamorous work of healing, the exercises Dora gave her, the careful progress of the arm, the daily accounting of what hurt and how much and whether it was improving. She was not thinking about precedents or signals or political consequences. She was thinking about the fox and the river and whether she would be able to hold a cup without the brace by next week. She was also, in the quiet of the evenings when the lamp was low and the palace sounds had settled into their night rhythms, thinking about the king sitting in the chair beside her bed and saying, "I want to make sure you are never invisible again." She was thinking about what that meant, about what it would cost him, about what it would require of her, which was something she had never considered before, that being seen, being formal and officially present in the world, was a thing that required something from the person being seen, not just the people doing the seeing. She thought about the scar on her collarbone. She thought about Pip, which she did rarely and always briefly, because the thought of him was one of the ones that did not improve with handling. She thought about what Callan had understood when she said, "I failed once." She thought about the fact that he had not pushed, had not asked, had simply said, "I think I understand." She thought about what it meant to be understood by a person whose understanding actually changed things. She was not sure yet what to do with any of it. She was fairly certain she would figure it out. She was, as it turned out, the kind of person who figured things out. She held on. Hilda's bread was famous in the lower kitchens for two things: the smell of it, which reached every corridor on the ground floor and had been known to pull people toward the kitchen who had no business there, and the fact that Hilda herself made it according to a process that no one else was permitted to observe, not because it was secret but because, as she put it, bread knows when it is being watched and performs accordingly. On the 15th day, she sent a loaf to the healing wing. Not through the formal channel of the kitchen delivery, she carried it herself, wrapped in the blue cloth that had been her mother's, which she had not used for bread before and did not explain now. Dora accepted it at the door. She looked at the cloth. "You can leave the cloth," Hilda said. "I brought it for her." Dora brought both inside. Mara looked at the loaf, and the cloth, and the specific care with which they had arrived, and she thought about the folded blue cloth that had appeared outside her door in the first days, and she understood with a clarity that required no further explanation that these were not separate things. She held the cloth for a moment. It was soft from many washings, worn smooth at the edges. The blue faded to something more complicated than its original color. She set it aside carefully, with the small deliberateness of someone who understands the difference between a gift that is given to be admired and a gift that is given to be used. She ate the bread that evening with the particular appreciation of a person who has been on the healer's prescribed diet for 2 weeks and has been finding it character-building. It was the best bread she had ever eaten. She told Dora this. Dora said in her dry way, "Don't tell Hilda that or she will never stop." Mara said perhaps she should not stop. Dora looked at her, then she looked at the remaining half of the loaf, then she cut herself a piece. They ate in companionable silence, the two of them in the pale evening light of the healing wing, with the bread between them and the palace going quiet around them, and nothing needing to be said. On the 16th day, the intelligence reports on the Ashblood clan came back with something new. Rafe brought them to Callan's office in a leather folder, which meant they were significant. Rafe did not use the leather folder for routine reports. Callan opened it. The Ashblood clan had been building, not just the border provocations, not just the two letters, building in a more structural sense over the past 8 months. Alliances with 2 smaller clans to the north, a significant increase in their armed force. Supply routes established through the mountain passes that had been unused for 20 years. Not preparations for a raid, preparations for something larger. They had always intended more than one attempt. The night of the nursery had been the beginning, not the whole, a first move designed to destabilize the succession and create a vacuum. The second move was still coming, and if the intelligence was accurate, it was coming within the next 3 months. Callan read the reports twice. He set the folder down. "They want the whole thing," he said. "That is the assessment," Rafe said. He was standing, as he always stood in this kind of meeting, still, with the economy of movement of someone who has trained it into his body over decades. They have been building since before the nursery incident. Since early spring, by the evidence. Callan looked at the map on his desk, the eastern territories, the mountain passes, the positions of the smaller clans. He had been tracking the Ashblood situation for months as a border concern, a moderate threat, something to monitor. The intelligence in the folder changed the category. "We have 3 months, Callan said. "At most," Rafe said, "possibly less." "What do we need?" "More than we have in the east. I can shore up the border positions within 2 weeks. The mountain passes are the vulnerability. We need physical presence in 3 of the 4 to close the supply routes." "Do it," Callan said. Rafe nodded. "And the nursery," Callan said. "It is as tight as I can make it." "Keep it that way." Rafe picked up the folder. "Sir," he said, in the tone he used when there was something more. "Say it." "The Ashblood letter, the one to the council. Aldrich has read it." Callan was very still. "He has a copy." "The messenger delivered 2, one for you, one for the council. Protocol requires both be delivered." Rafe paused. "I delivered yours first and came to you directly. The council copy was delivered this morning." "And Aldrich read it?" "Yes, sir." Callan thought about this. He thought about the sequence. The intelligence reports showing a 3-month window, the letter to the council positioning any recognition of Mara as a sign of weakness, Aldrich reading that letter this morning. He thought about what Aldrich would do with it. "He will bring it to the full council," Callan said. "Almost certainly. He will use it to argue that the formal recognition is a political liability, that the Ashblood clan is already using it against us, and proceeding would be seen as provocation or instability." "Yes, sir, that is my reading." Callan nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he did the particular work of a man assessing a situation across multiple angles simultaneously. "Schedule the formal announcement for 3 weeks from today," he said. Rafe looked at him. 3 weeks. "Dora says Mara will be strong enough to stand by then. I want her standing for it." He paused. "And schedule a full council session for the day after tomorrow. I want them all in the room when I tell them directly what I am doing and why. That will give Aldrich time to prepare opposition." "Yes," Callan said, "I want him to have time to prepare. I want every argument on the table in the open where I can address it directly." He looked at the map. "Letting things build in corners is how you end up with surprises. Aldrich should say what he is going to say in the council hall, not in antechambers." Rafe considered this. The Ashblood letter will be part of his argument. "Let it be," Callan said. "The answer to a letter saying I am weak is not to prove them right." Rafe looked at him for a moment. He had the expression he sometimes got, a particular steadiness, not quite admiration, but the look of a man assessing another man and finding what he expected to find. "Yes, sir," he said. He left, and Callan sat with the map and the intelligence reports and the particular cold clarity of a situation that has become very large and is not going to get smaller. He had 3 months. He had a formal recognition to make and a council to face, and a clan on his eastern border making preparations for something significant. He had a son who was sleeping better now, and an Omega in a healing wing getting stronger by the day, and the story of what happened in the nursery spreading through the town below the palace walls in the way that stories spread when they carry something real in them. He had a great deal of work to do. He began. She stood for the first time without help on the 18th day. It was not graceful. It was the slow, testing effort of a body relearning the relationship between intention and execution. Up from the bed, both feet on the floor, the left arm still partially restricted but the right hand gripping the bedpost, and then the business of straightening up by degrees, the back making its opinion known clearly at every stage of the process. Dora was beside her and did not touch her, which was the right instinct. Mara did not want help. She wanted to do it, and the only useful thing anyone could do at this point was be nearby in case she needed it and otherwise stay out of the way. She stood fully upright. It took approximately 10 seconds and felt considerably longer. She was breathing more than she should need to be for simply standing, which she found irritating and which she would not say anything about. "Good," Dora said. "Good," Mara agreed. "Now sit back down before you decide to try walking." Mara sat back down. She did this without argument because she was sensible, and because Dora was right, and because there was a difference between doing a thing and doing it well, and today was clearly still in the category of doing it at all. 3 more days of this, Dora said, standing short distances building up, then we discuss the return. The return. The words settled into the room with a weight that was not heavy but was present. The nursery, Mara said. You can start with shorter hours, Dora said. There is no requirement to. The nursery, Mara said again, not loudly, just with the calm specificity of someone removing an option from the discussion. Dora looked at her. She had over the 18 days developed a fairly precise map of Mara's particular kind of stubbornness, the quiet, non-confrontational variety that was in some ways more difficult to navigate than the loud kind, because it did not give you anything to push back against. It simply was, the way a stone in a stream simply was, redirecting the water around it without effort or drama. The nursery, Dora said, yes, fine, she wrote something in her notes, but shorter hours until I say otherwise. Mara nodded. She looked at the window. Outside, the garden was visible from the angle of the bed, the trees along the far wall bare now, the last of the autumn color gone. It was a gray day, the sky close and even. She had been watching this garden for 18 days through the same window, and she knew the light of every hour in it, the way shadows moved across the flagstones, the particular gray of the sky in the mornings versus the evenings. She was ready to leave this room. She was ready in a way that was not impatience. She understood why the timeline was what it was, and she trusted Dora's judgment entirely, but simply the readiness of a person who has been still for long enough and can feel the correctness of forward motion without yet being able to achieve it. Callan is meeting with the full council tomorrow, she said. Dora paused in her writing. Yes. About the announcement. Yes. Mara was quiet. She looked at the garden. How bad will it be? She said. Dora set down her pen. This was significant. Dora did not set down her pen in the middle of notes unless the conversation required her full attention, and she was too honest to pretend otherwise. Aldrich has been building his case for 2 weeks, she said. He is thorough and he is experienced, and he genuinely believes the hierarchy should not be disturbed. He is not performing his objections. She paused. But he is wrong about this, and I think he knows it somewhere under the belief. The best arguments are the ones where the person making them is not entirely at ease with what they are arguing for. Does Callan know what he is walking into? Mara said. Callan always knows what he is walking into, Dora said. He is a man who reads a room before he enters it and prepares for the worst version of it and then walks in anyway. She picked up her pen again. He walked into Aldrich's version of this when he decided what he was going to do, and he made the decision regardless. That should tell you something. It did tell Mara something. She was not sure yet what she was supposed to do with what it told her. She sat with it in the quiet of the room, the way she sat with most things, not turning away from it, not reaching for it, just allowing it to be present until its shape became clearer. She had not asked to matter. She had not positioned herself, had not performed, had not done anything except what the situation required in the only way she knew how to do things. And now she mattered in ways that had consequences for people she had not consulted, and that created a specific kind of responsibility that she was still learning the contours of. She thought about Petra saying, if an Omega can do this and be recognized for it, then everything we have told ourselves about rank and bloodline is a story we agreed to keep. She thought about Hilda and the bread and the blue cloth. She thought about Elian's voice saying she held on Papa in the dark. She was not doing this for any of them, and she was doing it for all of them at once, which was not a contradiction but was difficult to explain. The council session on the 19th day lasted 4 hours. Callan had scheduled it for mid-morning, which meant it ran through the lunch hour and past it, into the early afternoon. The council hall had been full from the opening, all 12 senior members, the 4 junior members, 2 military advisors and Rafe, who attended in his capacity as head of the Royal Guard. Callan sat at the head of the long table and opened the session himself rather than delegating to the council secretary, which was unusual, and which everyone in the room immediately registered as intentional. "I am going to formally announce the elevation of Mara, the nursery ward currently recovering from her injuries, to the rank of Royal Shield," he said. "The announcement will take place in 3 weeks when she is strong enough to be present." He paused. "I am bringing this to the council now so that any formal objections can be raised and addressed directly in this room before the announcement is made." He looked around the table. He looked at Aldrich specifically for a moment and then let his gaze move on. "I will hear the objections," he said. There was a brief silence of the kind that occurs when a door is opened and people are deciding whether to walk through it. Aldrich walked through it. He was measured as he always was. He presented the case in the order he had prepared it, the question of precedent first, then the structural concerns, then the political analysis, and finally, with the particular timing of someone who has been holding his best piece until it would have the most impact, the second Ashblood letter. He read the relevant passage aloud. He read it without commentary, letting it sit in the room. Then he said, "The Ashblood clan has explicitly stated that any such elevation would be interpreted as instability. We are 3 months from a potential military engagement on the eastern border. This is not the time to send a signal of weakness, whatever the individual circumstances of the case." He sat back. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Callan said, "Thank you, Aldrich." He looked around the table. He waited to see whether anyone else had something to add. 3 other council members added brief points, variations on Aldrich's themes. He listened to all of them. Then he spoke. He was not a man who used speeches. He was not theatrical in the way some leaders were, did not reach for emotion as a tool or use the weight of language to flatten resistance. He was precise and direct, and expected to be heard clearly because what he said was worth hearing clearly, not because of the volume or the delivery. "The Ashblood clan sent 4 men through a nursery window to kill my 3-year-old son," he said. "They chose their timing deliberately during a diversionary incident they created. They had information about the palace's guard schedule. They executed the breach with the efficiency of people who had planned it carefully." He paused. "The only thing that did not go according to their plan was the woman in the nursery." He let that sit. That woman was there because the formal structure of this pack assigned her to that role. She was there because of the hierarchy that this council exists to uphold. She was exactly where rank and structure placed her. He looked at Aldrich, and she did what the rank above her did not. Aldrich's expression was composed. He was too experienced to react visibly. "You argue that recognizing her creates a precedent that destabilizes the hierarchy," Callan continued. "I would argue that what destabilizes a hierarchy is refusing to acknowledge what it produces." He set both hands flat on the table. "The Ashblood clan is not going to stop because we choose to remain unremarkable. They are already prepared for a larger engagement. You have all read the intelligence. They do not care whether we elevate Mara or not. They are coming regardless." He looked around the room. "What I am choosing," he said, "is that the world knows what happened. That the pup survived because a wolf of no rank and no bloodline and no formal standing put herself in the way of everything that was coming for him, with nothing but her own body and the decision not to move. That happened in my palace under my name, and I will not let it be filed away as a footnote." The room was silent. "Formal objections are noted," Callan said. "Any member of the council who wishes to submit a written objection for the record may do so by end of week. The announcement will proceed in 3 weeks." He stood. Aldrich looked at him from across the table. He had the expression of a man who is reformulating rather than conceding, who has heard a closed decision, and is now calculating how to exist within the new landscape it creates. "The pack will have questions," Aldrich said, "not as a threat, as a fact." "Yes," Callan said, "and I will answer them." He left the council hall. Behind him, the room broke into the noise of a meeting that has been dismissed before anyone expected it to be. Petra came to Callan's office at the end of the day. She did not knock because he had told her she did not need to. "Well," she said. He was at his desk. The day had been long and complex, and the intelligence reports were still spread across the surface, and he had 4 more things to deal with before the evening was done. "It went as expected," he said. "Aldrich. Thorough prepared." "Wrong." Petra sat down without being invited to, because she was one of the few people in the palace who could do that without it being something. "He will submit the written objection." "He will." "And the other 3. 2 will follow him. 1 is undecided." He paused. "Lena." Petra nodded. Lena was the youngest senior council member, 44 years old, careful in the way of someone who has not yet decided where her weight falls on the things that divide people. "I will talk to her." "Not to persuade," Callan said. "I don't need her vote, I just want her to have the full picture." "Of course," Petra said. She looked at him. "How was Mara today?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. I haven't been back." Petra looked at him with the particular attention of someone who is tracking something carefully. "You should go," she said. "The day." "Tomorrow then," she said. She should know what happened today before she hears it from someone else. He thought about this. He thought about Mara in the healing wing, getting stronger by the day, reading Fox books with Elian in the afternoons, doing the careful, methodical work of rebuilding what 4 eras had taken apart. He thought about what she had said when he told her his intention. All right, 2 words, no performance, just a clear acknowledgement of a thing agreed upon. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Good," Petra said. She stood. She is going to need to know what she is standing up for when the time comes. Not the politics of it, she will figure that out, but the specific weight of it. She looked at him. "You are better positioned to tell her that than I am." He looked at her. "Why?" Petra smiled, briefly and precisely, the smile of someone who finds a question obvious but is choosing not to say so directly. "Because some things need to come from a king," she said, "and some things need to come from a person, and you are both." She left. The office was quiet. The day's light was failing, the long winter-coming evening settling in through the windows, and the palace sounds had begun their shift from the full noise of the day to the quieter sounds of the evening. Callan sat at his desk and looked at the map and thought about 3 months, and an announcement in 3 weeks, and a woman getting to her feet in a healing wing room by inches, and a council that had been told a closed decision and would spend the next 3 weeks deciding how to live with it. He thought about tomorrow morning. He began to clear his desk for the night. He came the next morning. Earlier than the 9th day, before the first briefing, before Aldrich could intercept him in the antechamber, before the day built its walls around him. He came in the particular gray of early morning, before the sun had cleared the eastern wall, and he knocked again, and Dora let him in again with the same expression of someone who had expected this and was not surprised. Mara was standing when he came in. Not performing standing, she was at the window, with her right hand on the sill and her back slightly bent, which was the honest posture of a person who is managing something, not the upright performance of a person who wants to appear to be managing nothing. She looked at him when he entered and did not move from the window. "You look better," he said. "I stood unassisted yesterday," she said. Dora seemed pleased. "I heard." She looked at him. There was something in his expression she had not seen before, a specific quality of purpose, the look of a man who has come somewhere to say something and has decided he is going to say it directly. "The council session was yesterday," she said. "Yes. How was it?" He told her. Not the formal version, not the diplomatic summary, but the actual account, Aldrich's prepared case, the Ashblood letter read aloud, the 3 other voices, and then what he had said and the specific silence that followed and the closed decision statement and Aldrich's face afterward. She listened to all of it. She stood at the window in the gray morning light with her hand on the sill, and she listened without interrupting, the way she always listened, all the way, nothing held back. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He is not wrong that there will be a reaction," she said. "No. In the pack, not just the council. People who have built their lives around understanding what their rank means will have to rethink what it means. Some of them will not like it." Some of them will not, he agreed. I am not afraid of that, she said. I want to be clear about that. I am not saying you should reconsider. She looked at him directly. I am saying I understand what is being put into motion, and I want you to know that I understand it. He looked at her. When I came to you 9 days ago, he said, I said I wanted to make sure you were never invisible again. Yes, I want to say something more than that today. He paused. He was not a man who paused often. His speech was usually precise and without hesitation, the speech of someone who has thought through what he wants to say before saying it. The pause was deliberate. What you did in that nursery is not something I can place a proper value on. Not formally, not as a gesture, not in any terms the pack has language for. He looked at the window. My son is alive. I need you to know that I know what that means and that it is not something I carry lightly. Mara said nothing. She was looking at him with the same open, attentive expression she had worn on the 9th day, the expression that was not performing anything, that was simply present. Ilian said something to me on the 5th night, Callan said. In the dark, when I came to sit with him, he said she held on Papa, she didn't let go. She closed her eyes for a moment. He says that, she said. He says it to people. I heard he said it at a council meeting. He did, Callan said. He climbed up onto my lap and interrupted the senior military briefing to tell me. A very slight curve of expression, brief and genuine. I ended the meeting. She opened her eyes. She was looking at him with the careful attention of someone who is managing something and not letting it show. He is the reason, she said. I want to be precise about that. Not the rank, not the hierarchy. Ilian was in that room and he was 3 years old and there was no one else. She paused. I would do it again in the same instant. I know, he said. 4 arrows or 8, she said. I know, he said again. They were quiet. The morning light was shifting as the sun cleared the wall, the gray giving way to something warmer and more present, and the room changed with it. He wants to finish the Fox book, she said. He has mentioned it several times. I am going to finish it with him, she said. That is, I want to be clear about what I want. Regardless of the rank, regardless of the announcement, the nursery. Ilian, that is the thing I want. Callan looked at her. He looked at her with the specific attention of a man who is hearing something true and not dressing it with anything it does not need. I know, he said for the 3rd time, and this time it carried a different weight, not agreement, but recognition. The recognition of a person who has been told something that fits perfectly with what they already knew and is glad to have it confirmed. He stayed another half hour. They talked about the Fox book, which neither of them had read, but which Ilian had described in such thorough detail to both of them separately that they had a complete picture. They talked about Ilian's theory that the fox would make it across the river by befriending the fish, which Mara said was entirely in character for him, and which Callan said sounded like a reasonable diplomatic strategy. They talked about the 3 weeks until the announcement, and what Dora had said about the timeline, and the specific exercises the left arm still required. It was, on the surface, a very ordinary conversation. It was not an ordinary conversation. But they were both, in their different ways, people who understood that the most significant things often needed to be dressed in ordinary clothing, at least at first, in order to move freely. He left when the first briefing was called. He said good morning on his way out, the way he had said it 3 months ago in the library corridor, carrying a tray. It was the same phrase. It sounded entirely different. She stood at the window after he left and watched the morning establish itself fully in the garden, the bare trees and the pale flagstones, and the sky going from gray to a clear, cool blue. She thought about 3 weeks. She thought about standing formally in front of the pack, with her wounds still healing and receiving a thing that no Omega had received in 2 generations. She thought about the council's objections and Aldrich's careful, wrong arguments and the Ashblood letter and the 3 months that were coming. She thought about the fox, who was still standing at the river's edge in the brown-covered book waiting for them to return. She thought one thing at a time. She turned from the window and went back to bed, because Dora's schedule was Dora's schedule and she was, as Dora had noted, a sensible person. She closed her eyes and let the morning continue without her, and she was, for the first time in 19 days, something approaching at ease. She had a great deal of work ahead of her. She was ready for it. 3 days before the announcement, Aldrich submitted his formal written objection. It was 22 pages long. Callan read all of it. He read it in one sitting, late in the evening, with a cup of tea that went cold while he read. And when he was finished, he set it down and looked at the ceiling for a moment and thought about what it meant to be a thorough man who was wrong about a thorough thing. The objection covered everything Aldrich had said in the council session, and a great deal more. It addressed precedent with specific examples going back 4 generations. It addressed the structural implications of rank elevation outside the established criteria in careful, documented detail. It addressed the political optics with the kind of analysis that could only come from someone who had spent decades thinking about the relationship between symbol and consequence. And through all 22 pages, it was entirely consistent, entirely argued, and entirely built on the premise that the hierarchy was the thing, and that the hierarchy must be served above all other considerations, and that any act which the hierarchy had not formally produced could not be formally recognized without doing damage to the hierarchy itself. It was the argument of a man who had spent so long inside the structure that he could no longer see outside it. Callan wrote a response, not 22 pages, 6. He was not by nature expansive with language when precision would do. He addressed the precedent argument, the structural argument, and the political argument, and he concluded with 2 sentences that he spent the longest time on, rewriting them 4 times until they said exactly what he meant. The sentence was, "A structure that cannot recognize what it produces is not serving the pack, it is being served by it." He sent the response to Aldrich in the morning. He did not wait for Aldrich's reply, there was too much to do. The 3 weeks between the council session and the announcement had been full in the way that only a palace under pressure is full, meetings that cascaded into further meetings, intelligence updates that arrived at intervals, and each time required revision of the thinking that had preceded them, and the ordinary business of a kingdom that did not pause because the king had complicated things on his plate. The Ashblood border situation was developing in the way the intelligence had suggested. Rafe had the mountain passes covered, which closed the most urgent vulnerability, but the broader military positioning was still in progress and would be for the next month. The clan had not made another direct move. They were watching, clearly, assessing the palace's response to their letter, determining how the announcement would go and what it would tell them about the king they were preparing to challenge. Callan was aware of being watched. He had been aware of it for months, in the low-level way that experienced leaders learn to track the slight attention of a world that is evaluating you, that has not yet decided whether to believe that you are what you appear to be. He intended to be entirely clear on that point. The announcement would do it. Not because of the symbolism, though he understood the symbolism mattered, but because the announcement was the correct thing, and doing the correct thing clearly and without hesitation was, in his experience, the most effective signal of all. Weak kings hedged, uncertain kings modified and qualified. He was going to stand in front of the pack and say what happened and what it meant and what was going to be done about it, and if the Ashblood clan was watching, they would see a man who had made a decision and was standing in it without apology. Mara returned to the nursery 2 days before the announcement. She returned in the morning, on a day that was cold and clear, the first hard frost of winter visible on the stone courtyard below the nursery window. She walked from the healing wing with Dora beside her, not holding her arm, just beside her, maintaining the position of a person available if needed, and she walked the length of the corridor to the nursery door and stopped outside it. The 6 guards were there, 2 at the door, 2 at the corridor entrance, 2 out of sight but present. They were not the formal guards, they were Rafe's people, the ones he had hand-selected for the nursery assignment after the night of the attack. They had been there for 3 weeks. They looked at Mara when she arrived. The one nearest the door, a young woman named Orla who had the compact, attentive build of someone who took her work seriously, nodded to her. Not a formal nod, a personal one. Mara nodded back. She opened the nursery door. The room was clean. It had been cleaned thoroughly after the incident and maintained since. The bed was fresh. The lamp on the far table was replaced, and there was a small vase on the window ledge with a sprig of winter greenery in it that had not been there before and that she recognized as something Kit from the kitchen had probably done. The arrow hole in the pillow was gone, a new pillow. She stood in the room for a moment. She stood in the place where she had stood 22 days ago in the dark, with Ilian against her chest and 4 men between her and the door. She looked at the floor. She looked at the window, closed now against the winter cold, the latch newly reinforced. She was not afraid. She had asked herself, somewhere in the healing wing, whether she would be afraid when she came back, and the honest answer was that she did not know, and she had decided to find out rather than speculate. Now she was here, and the honest answer was, no. Not because what had happened here was small, but because what had happened here was done. The room was a room. The window was a window with a new latch. The floor was clean stone. She had been here thousands of times in 3 years, and she would be here thousands of times more, and the night of the attack was part of that, was woven into the room's history the way all significant events are woven, present but not defining, a thing that had happened rather than a thing that was still happening. She crossed to the far table. She checked the lamp. She checked the supply of oil. She picked up the brown-covered book from the shelf where it had been sitting, with Dora's ribbon still marking the page, and she set it on the reading table near the window. Then she pulled the chair to its usual position, close to the door, but angled slightly toward the room, where she could see everything, and she sat down. She sat there for a few minutes, just sitting, just being in the room, letting it be ordinary again, because it was ordinary again, because she was going to make it ordinary by being in it, which was the only way rooms become ordinary after they have been something else. Elian came at midday. He came in the fast, determined way he always moved, not running exactly, but at the fastest pace that could technically be described as walking. He came through the door and saw her in the chair, and he stopped. He looked at her in the chair. She looked at him. He crossed the room and climbed into her lap, and she put her arms around him, both arms now, the left still not quite full range but enough for this, and she held him, and he pressed his face into her collar exactly as he had the night of the attack, and they stayed like that for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, his voice slightly muffled, "You're back." "I'm back," she said. He lifted his head. He looked at her with the direct, assessing gaze that was so much his father's it sometimes startled her. "Does it still hurt?" "A little," she said, "getting better." He nodded seriously, then he looked at the book on the table. "The Fox," he said. "Ready when you are," she said. He climbed down from her lap and went to get the book. He carried it back with both hands, carefully, the way he carried things he considered important, and he climbed back into her lap and opened it to the ribbon-marked page. She read to him. She read with his weight against her chest and his small hands on the edges of the page and the winter light coming through the window and the new latch firm on the frame. She read about the fox at the river's edge, who was frightened of the water, who stood at the bank for a long time trying to decide. "He's scared," Elian said. "Yes," she said. "But he's going to cross." "How do you know?" Elian looked at the page. "Because he has to," he said, with the simple certainty of a child who understands that necessity and fear are not the same thing. If he stays on the edge, he never gets to the other side. She was quiet for a moment. "That is exactly right," she said. She kept reading. The day before the announcement, Callan came to the nursery. It was evening, the palace had gone into its end-of-day rhythm, the guards changed, the kitchens quieting, the corridors emptying. He came without escort, as he had gotten into the habit of doing when he came this direction, and he stopped at the nursery door and listened for a moment before knocking. He could hear, through the door, the low sound of Mara's voice. She was still reading. He knocked quietly. She said, "Come in," and he opened the door, and Elian was asleep in her lap, and she was holding the open book in her right hand and holding Elian with her left, which she was not supposed to be doing yet with the left arm, but which she was clearly going to do anyway, because the left arm was where the child had put himself. She looked up at him. She looked entirely herself, the stillness, the direct attention, the complete absence of performance. He came in and closed the door quietly. He stood for a moment, looking at his son asleep in her lap, and felt the thing he had been feeling at intervals for 22 days, that movement in the chest, the door opening into the place that had been closed. "He is out properly," she said quietly. "He usually is by now." He looked at the book, "The Fox." "He crossed the river," she said. "He was scared, but he crossed." Callan sat on the edge of the low chair near the window, not the chair beside her, that was Elian's chair, and they both understood that implicitly. He sat on the edge and looked at his sleeping son and was quiet. "Tomorrow," he said. "Yes," she said. "How do you feel about it?" She considered this genuinely, not as a formality. "Ready," she said. I am ready. He looked at her. The lamp on the far table was lit, and the room was warm, and Ilian was asleep between them, and the window latch was tight, and outside the palace the cold night was clear. The council's written objections are on record, he said. I have responded to each of them. The announcement will go forward at the 3rd hour of the morning in the main courtyard. He paused. The full pack will be called. I want the whole of it witnessed. She nodded. I want to ask you something, he said, before tomorrow. She looked at him. Is there anything you want said, he said, about what happened, about what you did, about how you want to be understood? He paused. I have prepared the announcement, but it is about you, and I want to know if there is something I have missed. She was quiet for a moment. Say it simply, she said. What happened and that you are recognizing it. Do not make it larger than it is. Some would say it cannot be made larger than it is, he said. Then say it at its exact size, she said. That is all I want. He nodded. Outside, a night bird was calling somewhere in the pine trees along the eastern wall, and the sound carried in the cold air clearly and without obstruction. All right, he said. He stayed until Ilian stirred, and then he lifted his son carefully from Mara's lap, Ilian's head on his shoulder, still more asleep than awake, and he carried him to the small bed and laid him down and put the blanket over him. He turned back to Mara. She was sitting in the chair with the book in her lap and the lamp behind her, and she looked, in the low light, like someone who had arrived somewhere after a very long journey and had recognized the destination on sight. Good night, he said. Good night, she said. He left the nursery, and the door closed softly, and she sat in the quiet room for a little longer, listening to Ilian's steady breathing, and the night bird in the trees, and the palace settling into its deep winter stillness. Tomorrow. She was ready. The night before the announcement, the palace did not sleep entirely. Not in an anxious way, not the restless, fearful sleeplessness of people who are afraid of what is coming. More the particular wakefulness of a place that is aware of itself, that knows something is about to happen, and is holding the knowledge in its walls while the hours moved through. In the lower kitchens, Hilda was awake before the dawn and baking. She was baking the particular bread she made for significant occasions, different from the daily bread, denser with a richer crust, the kind that lasted and could be shared without diminishing. She had made it 3 times in 22 years, once when the old king died, once when Callan married Sira, and once when Ilian was born. She made it now without discussing it with anyone because she did not need permission to recognize a significant occasion when it was in front of her. In the guard quarters, the night shift changed at the usual hour, and the nursery guard changed at the usual hour, and the new shift took their positions with the particular alertness that had characterized the nursery assignment since the new protocol was implemented. But there was also, this night, a quality of something other than professional alertness. Orla, at the nursery door, stood in her place with the specific straight posture of someone who is aware that the morning matters and wants to meet it correctly. In the council wing, Aldrich was at his desk. He was not preparing further arguments. He had submitted his objection. He had done what the formal process allowed him to do. He was instead sitting at his desk in the dark with a cup of cold tea and thinking. He was an intelligent man, and intelligent men in dark rooms with cold tea often arrive at thoughts they would not allow themselves in daylight. He was thinking about what Callan had said in the council session. A structure that cannot recognize what it produces is not serving the pack. It is being served by it. He was thinking about whether that was true. He had decided, in the formal light of day and the formal language of his objection, that it was not. But in the dark, with the cold tea, he was thinking about it differently. He did not come to a conclusion before morning, but he sat with the thought longer than he had intended to, and that itself told him something. In the healing wing, which was now mostly empty, Mara's room had been cleared, the bed stripped and reset for the next occupant. Dora sat in her office writing her notes for the day, recording the final entries of a patient whose case had been, in 31 years, the most significant she had managed. She wrote carefully and precisely, as she always wrote, and at the end of the notes she wrote a single sentence that was not strictly medical. She was ready to stand before we were ready to see it. She capped her pen and looked at what she had written and left it in the record. The morning of the announcement was cold and clear. The frost that had been settling nightly for the past week had made the courtyard stone pale and sharp-edged, and the sky was the deep blue of winter mornings when the air has been cleared by cold, and everything looked slightly more itself than usual. The pennants above the main gate moved in a light wind. The pine trees along the eastern wall were still, dark green against the pale sky. The full pack had been called. That meant everyone within the palace walls and the town surrounding it. A call issued the previous day through the formal channels, which meant horns at the main gate and runners to the outer districts. It was unusual. The full pack was called for formal occasions that were considered significant enough to require the whole community's witness. Declarations of war, formal successions, alliances sealed. People came. They came from the town in their winter clothes, through the main gate, filling the courtyard from the edges inward. They came from the domestic staff, from the guard barracks, from the council wing, from the kitchens and the stables and the outer buildings. By the third hour, the courtyard was full in a way it was rarely full, not packed tight, but filled completely, every space occupied, a crowd that was quiet in the way of people who are paying attention. Callan came to the raised stone platform at the north end of the courtyard at exactly the third hour. He came alone, no attendants, no ceremonial escort. He wore the formal jacket but no crown. He reserved the crown for the 3 occasions it was specifically required, and this was not one of them. He stood at the platform edge and looked at the crowd below him, and the crowd looked back. He waited for the full quiet. It came quickly, the particular rapid settling of a large group of people who want to hear clearly. He spoke. He told them what had happened. Not the summary version, not the diplomatic version, the account. 4 men through the nursery window, the diversionary fire in the stable, the gap in the guard coverage, the woman in the chair who had been reading when she heard the sound. He described what happened in the order it happened, the arrow before the warning, the child pulled from the bed in the half-second between the sound and the shot, the first arrow, the second, the third, the fourth. He said, she held her position through all 4. She did not let go of my son. The courtyard was very quiet. She is an Omega, he said. She has no rank in the pack hierarchy. She has no bloodline, no formal standing, no combat record. She has been in this palace for 3 years as a nursery ward, and in those 3 years I have said good morning to her once. He paused. That is not something I say as a confession. I say it because it is exactly true, and because the truth of it illuminates something about how we see the people in our pack, about who we look at and who we look past. The crowd was silent. An Omega stood in the dark with 4 arrows in her body and kept my son alive, he said. In any fair account of the world, that is the largest thing that happened in this palace in 3 years, possibly longer. He looked across the crowd. He could see in the front rows the senior council members, Aldrich still and composed, Petra beside him, her chin slightly lifted, Lena, who had written a brief, careful message of support 2 days ago and had not made it public. He could see Rafe at the edge of the platform in his guard captain's coat, with his arms folded and his face entirely steady. He could see Hilda near the back, very upright, with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for this her entire life. Mara, he said, and turned slightly to his left. She came from the side of the platform, not from behind him. She came from where she had been standing, slightly out of the crowd's line of sight, and she walked to where he was. She was in her full formal bearing now, the kind she did not use often and which, when she used it, changed the room around her. She walked to the platform edge and stood beside him, and the crowd saw her, and the crowd was very quiet. She was pale, the weeks of recovery had not given that back yet. Her left arm was out of the brace but held carefully, the movement of it deliberate. She stood straight because she always stood straight when it mattered, regardless of what it cost. She looked at the crowd. She did not look away. Callan reached beside him to the small table that had been placed there, and he lifted the formal chain, not a heavy thing, not theatrical, a clean piece of worked metal with the royal shield insignia on a clasp at the center, and he turned to her. For what you did, he said, not as compensation, as recognition. He paused, as an accounting of what actually happened. He placed the chain. She stood still while he placed it, looking out at the crowd. She did not close her eyes. She did not bow her head. She stood with 4 healing wounds and a straight back and the particular stillness of a person who knows that this moment is about more than them and is choosing to hold it accordingly. The crowd was still silent. Then, from somewhere near the back, near where Hilda was standing, which was not a coincidence, someone went to one knee. And then someone beside them. And then the ripple, because ripples do not need instruction, they only need a direction. It moved forward from the back, through the domestic staff, through the lower ranks, through the stable hands and the kitchen workers and the outer gate guards, and the town people who had come in their winter clothes to witness something they had not yet named but recognized immediately. It reached the front. Rafe went to one knee. Orla, at the platform edge, went to one knee. 3 of the guard rank behind her went to one knee. It reached the council. Petra went to one knee. Lena, after a moment, a short moment, not a long one, went to one knee. Aldrich did not. He stood, and his face was composed, and his expression was the expression of a man who is watching something he had decided was wrong and is in the process of revising that decision in real time. He did not kneel. He was the only one in the front row who did not. He looked at Mara. She looked back at him. Whatever passed between them in that look was not triumphant. It was not cold. It was 2 people who had been on opposite sides of a question and who were now standing in the same answer, and who both understood that the question had not been about her. Callan stood beside her and did not speak. The moment did not need his voice. The courtyard was full of people on their knees, and the cold morning light was clear and sharp across the pale stone, and the pennants moved in the light wind, and somewhere in the pine trees along the eastern wall, a bird was calling with that clear and carrying sound. Mara stood in all of it. She stood. After the courtyard, Aldrich came to find her. Not immediately. She had been brought back inside by Dora, who had been watching from the platform steps and had decided that whatever the morning required had been given, and that Mara's back had been upright for long enough. Mara had not argued. She was very tired, not the worn-out tiredness of someone who had overextended, but the deep, settled tiredness of a person who has been holding something heavy and has finally been permitted to put it down. She was in the council antechamber when Aldrich came. Dora had steered her there because it was warm and quiet, and had a sofa that Mara had been guided firmly toward, and she was sitting upright on it, not lying down, because lying down felt like conceding something she had not yet finished, when the door opened and Aldrich came in. He stopped when he saw her. He had been looking for her clearly, but he had not been certain of where she was, and he took in the room Dora in the corner, Mara on the sofa, the cold morning still visible through the antechamber window, and he straightened slightly. He was a tall man. He carried himself with the precision of someone who has understood for a long time that how you occupy space communicates things. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from the sofa without being invited to. This was not rudeness. It was the action of a man who was not here in his official capacity and did not want to pretend otherwise. Mara looked at him. He looked at her. "I did not kneel," he said. "I saw," she said. "I want to be direct about why." He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who is not organizing excuses but is organizing accuracy. "I spent 22 pages arguing that what was being done was wrong. I believe the structural concerns are real and will have consequences." He paused. "I do not believe that diminishes what you did. I want you to know that clearly. I never believed that." She held his gaze. "Then what did you believe?" "That the system should have done this," he said. "That the system should have been the thing that recognized you. That we should not be standing in a courtyard with the king making a unilateral decision because the system was insufficient to it." He stopped. "I was arguing against the symptom and calling it the disease." She was quiet. "That is what I understood in the dark last night," he said. "Late, too late to revise the objection." He looked at the window for a moment. "The system failed, you succeeded. The recognition is the king's response to both of those things, and my objection to the form of the response was narrower than the situation deserved." She had not expected this. She had expected from Aldrich a formal acknowledgement of a formal decision, the composed acceptance of a man who has lost a specific fight and is performing appropriate grace. She had not expected this, an honest accounting, spoken plainly, in a room with only Dora as witness. "You still think the precedent is a problem," she said. "I do," he said, "and I think Callan will have to work for a long time to manage it well. The pack will test the boundaries of what it means, and some of those tests will be difficult." He paused. "But I also think the precedent is true, which is different from it being manageable." She understood that distinction. It was precisely the kind of distinction that took an intelligent person a long time to arrive at. "The scar," he said. He was looking at her collarbone where the old scar was visible above the collar of her robe, and then he looked up at her face. "I heard that you have spoken of it, not the details, only that there was a previous event." Yes, she said. I will not ask about it, he said. But I want to say whatever it was and whatever it produced in you, I think the pack should be grateful for it. She was quiet. I am grateful for it, he said. Whatever that is worth from me. She looked at him for a long moment. She was not going to pretend the past 3 weeks had not happened. She was not going to paper over the objection or the letter to the council or the 22 pages. He was not asking her to. He was asking only to be seen clearly, in the same way that she had wanted to be seen clearly at her exact size, neither larger nor smaller. It is worth something, she said. Yes. He nodded, he stood. He moved toward the door with the economy of a man who has said what he came to say and does not believe in prolonging things past their natural end. At the door he stopped. The formal title, he said, Royal Shield. He turned slightly. It is the right title. He paused. I want you to know I think that. He left. Dora, in the corner, had not moved during any of this. She looked at Mara now with the expression of someone who has witnessed something and is choosing not to comment on it. Lie down, she said. I am upright on the sofa, Mara said. Lie down on the sofa, Dora said. Mara considered arguing. She decided against it. She lay down on the sofa, which was, she had to admit, a significant improvement. Dora covered her with a blanket that appeared from somewhere, with the efficiency of a healer who anticipates needs and brings resources accordingly. Sleep, Dora said. Mara closed her eyes. She was more tired than she had allowed herself to notice. She let the tiredness in, and it was, she found, a good kind of tiredness. The kind that comes after a thing has been done rather than the kind that comes from avoiding it. She slept. The question of the scar had been there in the background since Callan had acknowledged it on the 9th day. It was not a thing she needed to address formally. No one expected an explanation. Callan had not asked. Aldrich had not asked. Even Elian, who had touched it years ago with a child's direct attention, had not asked again. But the question existed in the air around her now in a way it had not before. She had been visible in the public way, the announcement, the chain, the courtyard full of people on their knees, and visibility had a quality of opening. People who are seen feel that others are looking, and people who are looking notice the things that the seen person has not explained. She did not feel compelled to explain it, but she found, in the days after the announcement, that she was thinking about it more directly than she usually allowed herself. Pip had been 4 years old, she had been 11. The village had not been large, a cluster of houses along a trade road, the kind of place that is important to the people in it and invisible to everyone else. The men had come at night, as such men do, for the goods in the merchant's storage house at the edge of the village. She had been in the way. More specifically, Pip had been in the way. He was the merchant's son, and he had gotten up in the night, as small children do, and had come into the wrong hallway at the wrong moment. She had seen him from the window of the room she shared with 2 other children from the village's working families. She had not thought. She had gone. She had put herself between Pip and the men, and she had received the wound across her collarbone, and the men had moved around her, because moving around an 11-year-old was easier than dealing with the question of what to do with one, and they had taken Pip and left. She had stood in the hallway with blood on her collarbone, and the specific horror of understanding that being in the way was not the same as stopping something. She had been 11 years old. She had made the only decision available to her, and it had not been enough, and she had grown up with that particular kind of failure, not the failure of not trying, but the failure of trying everything you had and having it be insufficient. That failure had shaped the next 20 years, not as a wound that hobbled her, but as a fact that informed her, that made her more precise about being in the right place, that made her think through contingencies, that made her stay when staying was what was needed because she knew the cost of not staying. She had not saved Pip, she had saved Elian. These were not the same event, she understood that. She was not a person who collapsed different things into each other, who looked for the clean narrative that made one story redeem another. It was not a redemption, it was not a balancing of a scale. But it was something. It was the accumulation of every night spent in the chair near the door, every hour of paying attention to the sounds of a sleeping child, every thought about what she would do and how she would do it and what she would not allow to happen. It was 20 years of a person deciding, every day, what they were going to be. She had been that when the men came through the window. She had been exactly that. It was not a comfort exactly, but it was a clarification. She had known what she was doing, and she had done it. Callan came to the nursery that evening. Ilian was already asleep. It had been a long day for him too, a day he had experienced in the particular way of a 3-year-old, which is to say at half understanding and full intensity. He had been in the courtyard for the announcement, held by Dora at the platform edge, and he had watched with the unreadable focus he sometimes had, and he had said nothing much afterward except to Kit on the way back to the nursery. Now everyone knows. Kit had asked what he meant. About Mara, he had said, as if this were obvious, and gone to have his lunch. He was asleep now, and the nursery was quiet, and Mara was in the chair near the door with a book she had not been reading, and Callan knocked and came in the way he had got into the habit of doing, quietly, with a sensitivity to the room's rhythms that she had noticed, and that surprised her slightly, given that he was a man whose presence in any room changed the room. He sat on the edge of the chair near the window, as he had before. "Aldrich came to see you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "What did he say?" She told him. She told him with the same precision she applied to most things, the argument about the system, the distinction Aldrich had drawn between the precedent being a problem and the precedent being true, the thing he had said about the scar. Callan listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He is a better man than I gave him credit for this morning," he said. "He is a good man who was wrong about something," she said. "That is not the same as not being good." Callan looked at her. He had the expression he sometimes had in these conversations, a quality of attention that was not calculating, just fully present, the expression of someone who is listening to the actual words and not a version of them they have already prepared a response to. "The scar," he said. "I have been thinking about it." She looked at him. "You said you failed once," he said, "but you were 11 years old, Mara, against men who were armed and who had a specific purpose and who were not deterred by an 11-year-old. He paused. Staying was not a failure. It was everything that was possible at 11 years old. She was very still. No one had ever said that to her. In 20 years no one had said that to her, not because people were unkind about it, but because the people who knew about it were the village people who had processed it as a loss and moved on, and she had processed it as a failure and carried it, and neither group had ever sat in a room together and said, "Wait, these are not the same thing." She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at the window. "I have always called it a failure," she said. "I know," he said. "I am saying it was not." She looked at him. She was doing the particular work of someone who is receiving a thing that changes a framework they have been living inside of for a very long time. It was not comfortable. It was not comfortable in the way that clarity is not comfortable when it arrives late. "The boy's name was Pip," she said. She had not said the name to anyone in years. "Tell me about him," Callan said. She told him. She told him about Pip, the round face, the habit of holding things with both hands, the way he followed her around the village with the devotion of a small child who has chosen someone and is absolute about it. She told him about the night, and the hallway, and the wound, and the men moving around her, and the sound of Pip being taken, and the sound of a village that was still and helpless around her in the dark. She told him about standing in the hallway with the blood on her collarbone and understanding, at 11 years old, that there were things you could not prevent even when you were in the way of them. She told him about carrying that for 20 years. Callan listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not offer consolation at intervals. He listened the way he had listened to the intelligence reports and the council objections, fully, without reaching for the response before the telling was done. When she finished, the room was quiet. "He would have been 24, she said. She stopped. "Yes," Callan said. She looked at her hands. "I don't know why I told you that." "You told me because I asked," he said. She looked up. "You asked about him. Not many people have." "He mattered," Callan said. "That seems clear." He paused. "The people who matter to you seem to leave a very permanent mark." She was quiet. "I count myself in that," he said. "I am aware that my son is alive because of the mark Pip left." She looked at him. He held her gaze with the steadiness he held most things, without flinching, without softening it into something easier. He said exactly what he meant, and he let it be said. The lamp was low on the table. Ilian's breathing was slow and even behind them. Outside, the winter night had settled over the palace, deep and still. She thought about the fox in the river, she thought about crossing. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For asking," she said, "about him." He nodded once. He stood and he looked at his son for a moment, and then he looked at her. "Good night, Mara," he said. "Good night," she said. He left and the door closed, and she sat in the quiet with Pip in her mind for the first time in a way that was not only grief, but something quieter and more complex, something that did not erase the loss but sat beside it differently. She stayed until the lamp burned low. Then she checked the window latch and the door and the sleeping child in the small bed, and she went to her own room, her own proper room now, reassigned as befitting a royal shield, larger than the closet she had occupied before, with a real window and a real desk and a shelf for her books. She sat on the edge of the bed. She thought about the morning's courtyard, and the chain placed on her shoulders, and the pack going to its knees. She thought about Aldrich's honest reckoning and Petra's careful precision and Rafe's nod at the nursery door. She thought about Elian saying, "Now everyone knows." She thought about Callan saying, "The people who matter to you seem to leave a very permanent mark." She lay down. She looked at the ceiling, which was higher than the healing wing ceiling, which was higher than the closet room ceiling. She thought, "Pip." She thought, "I did not forget you. I have been holding you all this time." She thought, "I hope you are somewhere the holding reached." She closed her eyes. She slept. The announcement had consequences, as announcements of this size always did. The most immediate one was visible. The pack shifted. Not dramatically, not overnight, not in the simple way that stories sometimes suggest. A single event does not change 20 generations of embedded hierarchy in one morning, but something moved, and the movement was real. It was visible in small things first. In the way the lower staff stood when senior wolves passed in the corridor, still respectful but differently. Not with the compressed, invisible quality of people who have accepted that they do not count, with the particular straightness of people who have been told that they do, and are still deciding what to do with that, but are in the process of deciding. It was visible in the guard. Rafe had said nothing formally, made no speech, issued no instruction. But the dynamic on the nursery post had changed in a way that everyone on the post noticed. The distinction between Orla's authority as nursery post guard and the authority of the senior wolves in other posts had always existed on paper but been observed inconsistently in practice. It was observed consistently now. People were paying attention. It was visible in the council hall, where Lena had begun speaking in full council sessions with the confidence of someone who has realized that the person who goes to one knee is the one who gets seen. She had always been competent. She was now being heard. And it was visible in Aldrich, in ways that were subtle but that Petra noticed and that Callan noticed and that Mara noticed, from the courtyard and the subsequent days. He did not abandon his views. He was not a man who did that, who jettisoned a position simply because the political wind shifted. But he stopped speaking about the precedent in the language of catastrophe and began speaking about it in the language of management. The difference was small to anyone who was not listening carefully. To anyone who was, it was significant. The pack tested the boundaries as Aldrich had predicted it would. Cases came to the council in the weeks after the announcement, lower-ranked wolves who had done extraordinary things and whose contributions had previously been absorbed without recognition, wanting to know what the new framework meant for them. Callan heard each one. Some resulted in formal recognition. Some did not because the situation did not warrant it. But each one was heard with the seriousness of a case that mattered, which was itself different. Mara did not attend the council hearings. That was not her role, and she was not interested in politics in the way some people are interested in it, as a game, as a system to be navigated, as a space where influence is accumulated. She was interested in the nursery, and in Elian, and in the specific and daily work of being exactly where she was. She was, by Dora's assessment, fully recovered by the end of the second month after the announcement. The back wound was the last to resolve completely. It took longer than the others, just as Dora had predicted, and there was a period of 3 weeks where it was persistent enough to limit her range of motion in ways she found frustrating. But it did resolve, and her arm regained its full strength, and the shoulder settled into only the faintest occasional ache that she was told would eventually stop, and which she considered, privately, a fair price. The scar would be new, 4 of them now added to the one on her collarbone. She had looked at them once, matter-of-factly, the day Dora signed off on the recovery. They were neat as such things go. Dora's work was precise. She had looked at them and thought, these are mine now. She had put her robe on and gone to the nursery. The Ashblood clan moved in the 3rd month. They did not move the way the intelligence had suggested they might. The intelligence had predicted a military push through the mountain passes, a coordinated engagement with the border posts, the kind of direct challenge that could be met with direct force. What they did instead was send a delegation. 20 wolves, formally dressed, with a flag of negotiation flying, arriving at the palace gate in broad daylight and requesting a formal audience with the Alpha King. Callan received the delegation 2 days after their arrival, after Rafe had confirmed they were as they presented, no weapons beyond the formal ones permitted under negotiation protocol, no additional forces nearby that the scouts could detect. He received them in the formal council hall, with the full council present, with Rafe at his right and 2 senior officers behind him, and with the dignity of a man who has been preparing for a threat and is entirely willing to engage with a different version of it. The delegation's lead was a woman named Greer, compact, careful, with the expression of someone who has been given a difficult task and is determined to execute it cleanly. She was not the Ashblood clan's leader. She was their most skilled diplomat, which was both a compliment and a careful distance, someone else's words in a capable mouth. The offer she laid on the table was this: a border agreement, a formal cessation of the provocations, a withdrawal of the Ashblood forces from the mountain positions. In exchange, the royal pack would recognize the Ashblood clan's autonomy over a specific disputed territory in the northeast, land that had been contested for 40 years, but that neither side had been able to hold decisively. It was, in the language of diplomacy, a face-saving offer. It said, "We cannot win this, and we are choosing not to have it be public that we cannot win it." Callan listened to the offer without interrupting. He let Greer present it in full. He let the silence settle after she finished. Then he said, "I want to be clear about something first." Greer looked at him. 2 men entered my son's nursery, he said. The attempt to remove the heir was not a border dispute. It was not a territorial disagreement. It was an act that, in any fair accounting, warrants a response that has nothing to do with territory. He paused. "I want the names of the 4 men who came through that window." The silence in the room was very complete. "That is not a negotiating position," he said. "That is a precondition." Greer was quiet for a moment. She was assessing, he could see, assessing the room, the weight of the statement, the specific quality of the man across the table. She said, "I will convey that requirement to my principals." "Do," he said. He leaned forward slightly. "The territorial offer is one we can discuss. The precondition is not negotiable." He paused. "And I want to be clear about something else. The names are not for a retribution I am planning. They are for the record. What happened that night is part of the public history of this pack, and I will not allow it to be part of the history without a complete accounting." Greer looked at him for a long moment. "I understand," she said. The delegation withdrew for consultation. They returned the next day with the names. The names went into the formal record. The 4 men were no longer in the Ashblood clan's service. They had been, according to the diplomatic language of the document, released from their position. What that meant in specific terms was something the Ashblood clan did not specify, and Callan did not press. He pressed nothing he did not need to press. He had what he needed. The border agreement took 3 weeks to negotiate in full. Rafe was present for every session, with his maps and his specific knowledge of the terrain that the Ashblood clan had consistently underestimated. Petra was present, because she had a mind for the precise language that agreements required. Aldrich was present, because whatever their recent differences, he was the most experienced negotiator in the palace, and Callan was not a man who let personal dynamics get in the way of competence. The agreement was signed in the council hall on a grey afternoon in the 2nd month after the announcement. Mara was not in the room. She knew about it because the palace talked, and because Petra had come to the nursery one evening and told her. "It is done," Petra said. Mara looked at her. The names were given. "Yes." She nodded. "The border agreement holds for 20 years, Petra said. "It is the most complete resolution of that situation in 40 years. Aldrich says it is the strongest agreement we have made in a generation." She paused. He says it could not have been made from a position of anything less than complete authority. Mara looked at the window. He means the announcement, she said, not as a question. He does, Petra said. He did not say it to you directly, he said it in council, but I thought you should know. Mara was quiet. He is not wrong, Petra said. The announcement changed how the Ashblood clan saw Callan. A king who does the correct thing without apology and wins the public for it is not a king who flinches when pressed. She paused. Whatever Aldrich said before, he understands that now. She left and Mara sat in the nursery with Ilian dozing on the reading chair beside her, and thought about the chain of things, the night of the arrows, the healing wing, the courtyard, the council, the delegation, the agreement. A long chain, each link made of something real. She thought I was in the nursery. She thought that is still the whole of it for me. She picked up the Fox book. They had finished it weeks ago and were now on a second reading at Ilian's request. He wanted to know what the fox did after the river. There were no more chapters. She had told him they would have to imagine it. He had thought about this seriously and then said, he finds another fox. She had said, maybe. And they share the river, Ilian said. That seems likely, she had agreed. She opened to the first page. Ilian stirred beside her without waking. She began to read. The formal challenge to the trial did not come from Aldrich. It came from a council member named Forrest, one of the three who had followed Aldrich's lead in the written objection and who had been quiet in the weeks since the announcement, in the way of a man who has decided the fight is not yet over, only relocated. Forrest was 61 years old, with the broad build and slow certainty of a wolf who had spent decades as a combat trainer before entering the council, and he brought the challenge with the formal precision of someone who had consulted the oldest pack laws available and found exactly the language he needed. The challenge was this: under the laws that governed rank elevation, laws that were old enough to predate Callan's grandfather, any elevation outside the established criteria could be contested by any pack member of sufficient standing, provided the contest was formal, witnessed, and judged by the full council. The criteria for elevation to Royal Shield were demonstrated combat ability, a formal record of service in a protective role, and evidence of sustained contribution to the safety of the royal line. The law required that these be established through a formal hearing, with the holder of the rank presenting their credentials to the council for review. Forrest's argument was simple: the credentials had never been formally established, the rank had been given, it had not been earned through the established process, the law required the process. He filed the challenge on a Tuesday morning in the council secretary's office, with full documentation and 3 council members as formal witnesses, and it landed on Callan's desk by the afternoon. Callan read it. He called Petra. She read it. He is technically correct, she said. She said it the way she said things that were true and unwelcome, plainly, without softening or drama. I know, Callan said. The law is old, but it is not repealed. It requires a formal hearing. She set the document down. The hearing is before the full council. Mara would need to present herself and answer to the criteria. Callan was quiet. He has done this carefully, Petra said. It is not a challenge to the announcement that cannot be challenged. It is a challenge to the formal establishment of the rank, which technically has not been done. She paused. He has found the one mechanism that cannot be dismissed as politics. Because it is procedure, Callan said. Yes. He looked at the document. He thought about Mara back in the nursery, fully recovered, reading the Fox book again with Ilian. He thought about her saying, say it at its exact size. She will have to stand in the trial circle, he said. Yes, Petra said, in front of the full council, with Forrest presenting the formal challenge and the council sitting in judgment and the criteria examined. She paused. She will need to answer to all 3 criteria. Demonstrated combat ability, he said. Yes. She is an Omega, he said. Her combat ability by any formal metric is limited. Yes, Petra said, that is what Forrest is counting on. The combat criterion was written in a time when combat ability meant one very specific thing: wolf form, formal training, demonstrated strength in direct engagement. She looked at him. What she demonstrated in the nursery is not that, and under the letter of the law he can argue it does not meet the criterion. Callan was still. He cannot win the argument in the world, Petra said. Everyone in the courtyard saw what they saw. Everyone in the town knows the story. He cannot unmake that. She paused. But he can make the formal record of the rank contingent on a hearing she may struggle to pass under the law as written. Callan looked at her. What does she say when she is told? You should tell her yourself, Petra said. He went to the nursery. Mara listened to everything Callan told her. She listened with the complete attentiveness she brought to difficult information, the kind that did not flinch or manage its expression, but that engaged directly with what was being said, without reaching for the emotional response before the factual one was clear. When he finished, she was quiet. The combat criterion, she said. Yes, he said. In wolf form, she said, formal training demonstrated strength in direct engagement. That is the historical interpretation. She was quiet for a moment. I held 4 arrows in human form, she said, not with frustration, with the precise observation of someone locating exactly where the problem is. Yes, he said. And Forrest will argue that the law does not say in any form. It says demonstrated combat ability, and the council precedents establish what that has meant. He paused. Petra is reviewing the full record of the law. She believes there is an argument to be made for an expanded interpretation, but it is not a simple argument. When is the hearing? 3 weeks from Thursday, he said, as required by the formal challenge process. She looked at the window. Outside, the courtyard was visible, the same courtyard where 3 months ago the pack had gone to its knees. I will be there, she said. Mara, he said. There was a quality in his voice that was different from his usual measured tone, something slightly less composed, something that was attempting to contain something it was not entirely succeeding at containing. If the hearing does not go well, if Forrest constructs an argument the council accepts under the old law, the rank could be formally revoked. She looked at him. The announcement stands, he said. The public recognition cannot be taken, but the formal title, he stopped. I want you to understand what is at stake. She was looking at him steadily. He had the expression of a man who has been preparing her for a bad outcome because he cannot guarantee a good one, and who finds the preparation uncomfortable in a very specific way. I understand, she said. I will do everything in my power. I know you will, she said. That is not the question, she paused. The question is whether the law as it is written has room for what I did, and if it does not, whether that can be changed. She looked at him directly. Can it be changed? Not in 3 weeks, he said. A law change requires a full council vote and a 30-day deliberation period. Then the law as it stands is what I am standing in, she said, and I will stand in it. He was quiet. I have stood in rooms with less, she said. It was not bravado, it was the flat delivery of a fact. He looked at her. The expression on his face was the one she had been seeing at intervals for months, the one that was not about politics or decisions or the management of complex situations. The one that was simply about her, and about what he saw when he looked at her, and about what he did not have simple language for. I will be in that hearing, he said. I know. Whatever the outcome. I know, she said for the 3rd time, and the 3rd time it meant exactly what it had meant when he had said it to her on that morning in the healing wing. He nodded once. He left. The trial circle was set up in the main courtyard, not the full crowd of the announcement. The formal challenge hearing was a council proceeding, which meant council members, their formal witnesses, the challenger and the person being challenged. But formal witnesses in this context included any member of the pack in good standing who wished to attend, and the news of the challenge had traveled fast. By the time the hearing began on the appointed morning, the courtyard was full. Not a respectful, quiet full, a full that had an edge to it, a tension that was not hostile but was alive, the tension of a crowd that has shown up for a thing it cares about and is paying close attention to every development. Mara entered the trial circle from the south. She was in formal attire, the royal shield chain at her collar, the title she was here to defend visible and present, worn without apology. She had dressed herself that morning with the particular deliberateness of someone who understood that appearance is part of what a person brings to a room, and she had chosen to bring the chain. Forrest entered from the north. He was in formal council robes. He had the bearing of a man who has prepared thoroughly and believes in what he is doing and is not performing confidence, genuinely has it. The 12 senior council members sat on the raised bench along the west side of the circle. Aldrich was among them. Petra was not on the bench, she was not presiding, she was a regular council member here. She was in the crowd. Callan was not on the bench either. The Alpha King did not preside over formal challenge hearings, the council was the judge. He stood at the edge of the courtyard in the crowd because that was where the formal rules placed him today. He was there, that was what mattered. The council secretary opened the hearing. Forrest presented his challenge first. He was precise and thorough. He read the law. He cited the precedents. He presented the combat criterion and its historical interpretation, with specific reference to the 4 previous instances of Royal Shield elevation and the combat records that had been established in each case. He was careful, he never said Mara had done nothing. He said, with the language of a lawyer, the act of the 9th day demonstrated remarkable courage. The question before this council is not whether courage was displayed. The question is whether the formal criteria of the rank have been met. He sat down. The council secretary called Mara to present her case. She stood in the center of the trial circle. The circle was 30 feet across, open to the sky, the winter morning gray and close above the courtyard walls. She could see the crowd at every edge. She could see Callan at the south corner of the courtyard, still and present. She could see Elian. He was at the front of the crowd at the east edge with Orla beside him, not restraining him, just present. He was standing at the very edge of the circle, as close as he could get without crossing into it, and he was looking at her with the absolute focused attention he brought to things he had decided were important. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned to the council and spoke. She spoke without notes. She spoke in the plain, direct language she had always used, not with rhetoric, not with performance, not with the emotional appeals that might have worked on a sympathetic crowd but that she distrusted in herself. She spoke with the specific precision of someone who has thought carefully about what they are going to say and has decided that the truth, said clearly, is the most powerful thing available. She addressed each criterion in order. For the formal record of service, 3 years in the nursery, with the evidence of Elian's well-being over that period. A child who was safe and healthy and developing well in an environment she had maintained and protected. That was a record of protective service, she said, whatever the formal combat definition was. For sustained contribution to the safety of the royal line, the same 3 years and the 9th day and 4 arrows, and the child who was standing at the edge of the trial circle right now because she had been present. For demonstrated combat ability, she paused. She looked at the council. She said the law uses the word demonstrated. It does not specify the form. It does not specify a wolf shift or formal training or any of the historical precedents that have been cited here today. She paused. The precedents are precedents, they are not the law. The law says demonstrated combat ability. She looked at the council steadily. I demonstrated the ability to sustain position under sustained attack. I demonstrated the ability to protect a target under fire. I demonstrated the ability to prioritize a mission objective, the child's safety, over my own physical well-being through 4 separate impacts. She let that sit for a moment. If that is not combat ability, I am interested to know what the council believes combat is for. The courtyard was very quiet. The 12 council members on the bench looked at each other. Aldrich at the end of the bench was looking at his hands. Petra was watching him. The council secretary was writing. Forrest made a response. He was still careful, still precise. He challenged the interpretation of demonstrated, cited the precedents again, argued that the specific form of ability required was the historical form. The council deliberated. The deliberation was supposed to be private. The council members would withdraw to the antechamber and return with a judgment. But before the senior presiding member could call for withdrawal, something happened that was not in the procedural record. Elian crossed the circle. He was 3 years old, and the trial circle had a nominal boundary that was visible as a line of stones, and he stepped over it as if it were a line in the garden that someone had asked him to stay behind. He crossed the 30 feet of open space, alone, in the silence of the hearing with every person in the courtyard watching, and he came to stand beside Mara. He stood beside her. He was at her hip, because he was 3 and she was not tall, and he reached approximately her hip. He put one hand against her leg and he stood there and looked at the council. The courtyard was breathless. No one moved. No one corrected him. Orla, who had been beside him a moment ago, stayed where she was. Callan, at the south corner of the courtyard, was completely still. The presiding council member, a careful, gray-haired wolf named Owen, who had held his position for 15 years, looked at the child standing in the middle of the trial circle beside the woman being challenged, and then he looked at the other 11 members of the council. He made a decision. He cleared his throat. The council, he said, does not need to withdraw. The courtyard held its breath. The formal criteria of the rank of Royal Shield, Owen said, require demonstrated combat ability, a record of protective service, and sustained contribution to the safety of the royal line. He looked at his notes. He looked at Mara. He looked at Ilian, who was still standing at her hip, still looking at the council, still absolutely present. This council finds, Owen said, that all 3 criteria are met. He set down his notes. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then the courtyard broke. Not in noise, in motion. The motion of a crowd that has been holding something and has been given permission to let it go. People moved, and the movement was forward, and the sound that came with it was not cheering. It was something harder to name, something between relief and recognition, and the particular sound a large group of people makes when they have been told a thing they already knew and have been waiting to hear said. Forrest sat down. He sat down without expression, but he sat down with the quality of a man who has found, at the end of his argument, that it has led him somewhere he did not expect. Aldrich on the bench was not looking at the circle. He was looking at the crowd. He was looking at the motion of it, at the faces in it, at the wave of something genuine moving through 300 people. He was looking at it the way a man looks at something he has been wrong about, and is in the process of understanding that he was wrong. Mara was standing in the circle. Ilian was at her hip. She was looking out at the crowd and she was not performing anything. She was simply there, completely there, with 4 healing scars and a chain at her collar and a 3-year-old child pressed against her leg, and the winter morning was gray and close and absolutely clear. She put her right hand on Ilian's shoulder. He leaned into her side. She let him. After the hearing, Forrest came to her. Not immediately. There was the crowd to move through, the formal closing of the record, the council members dispersing from the bench. Callan reached her first, walking across the circle with the directness of a man who has been standing at the edge of something for 2 hours and is no longer required to remain there. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at her, and at Ilian still pressed against her side, and there was something in his expression that had no formal name, the expression of a man standing in the aftermath of something he had been afraid of, and is trying to locate himself correctly in what is now the other side of it. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. Ilian looked up at both of them. "Owen said all 3, he said, with the satisfied authority of a child who has been paying attention. "He did," Callan said. "Good," Ilian said, and went to lean against his father's leg instead, as if the matter was settled, and he was now free to apply his support wherever it was currently most needed. Callan looked at Mara over the top of Ilian's head. She looked back at him. Something in the look was different from all the previous looks across the past months. Not larger exactly, more settled. The look of 2 people who have been through a number of things together and have arrived, finally, at a place where the number of things can be set down and what remains is simpler. Forrest arrived then. He came with his formal bearing, but without the particular set of his jaw that he had worn during the hearing. He had made his argument, and it had been heard and judged, and whatever he carried now was different from what he had come in with. He looked at Mara. "Congratulations," he said. The word came with some effort, but it came honestly. She looked at him. "Thank you for bringing it formally," she said. She said it without irony because she meant it without irony. A challenge that was resolved built something stronger than a rank that was never tested. He looked slightly surprised, not by the civility but by the genuine quality of it. He gave her a brief nod and withdrew. Aldrich was the last of the council to leave the courtyard. He did not approach her. They had had their direct conversation in the antechamber months ago, and he was not a man who repeated himself. But as he passed on his way back to the council wing, he paused. He did not stop. He did not speak. He met her eyes for a moment and gave her the same small nod he had given her when he left the antechamber. It was, in the language of Aldrich, a great deal. She nodded back. He went on his way. The days after the hearing had a particular quality that the days before the announcement had not had, a settling, like the settling of a house that has been through a structural thing and is finding the new configuration of itself. The formal record of the rank was complete. The council's judgment was in the archive. Forrest's challenge was in the archive beside it. The whole of it, the nursery, the healing wing, the announcement, the challenge, the hearing, was now part of the formal history of the royal pack, documented with the thoroughness that Rafe and the council secretary had applied to it from the beginning. Mara did not feel different particularly. She had expected to feel different or had wondered if she would, and the answer was, not in the way she had imagined. She still woke before dawn. She still walked to the nursery in the morning. She still sat in the chair near the door. Ilian still climbed into her lap and asked about the fox. What was different was smaller and more pervasive than a feeling. It was the way people looked at her when she moved through the palace. Not with awe, not with the excessive deference she had been half afraid would follow the announcement. Just with the recognition of someone who has been properly placed in the world they actually occupy. The lower staff greeted her the same way they always had. Hilda still sent bread, though less frequently now, perhaps once a week. The blue cloth returned after the first time and now a standing practice, the bread wrapped in it when it arrived. Orla at the nursery door still nodded in her personal way. Kit from the kitchen still smelled of bread and still came with Ilian's lunch with a smile she was not directing at anyone in particular. These things had not changed. They were the actual content of her life and they had not changed, and she was glad of that. What had changed was that she held all of it differently. Not more carefully, she had always been careful, but with less of the particular tension of a person who is present in a place they are not sure they are permitted to be. She was permitted to be here. The world had formally said so in a courtyard twice. She could put the tension down. She was still learning how to do that. After 22 years of carrying it, putting it down was its own kind of work. She thought about Pip less in the weeks after the hearing, not because she had forgotten, she would never forget, and she did not want to, but she thought about him differently. She thought about him the way Callan had said to think about him. A 4-year-old boy who had mattered, who had left a permanent mark, whose absence had shaped everything that followed in ways that were not only grief. She thought about the chain of it, Pip to the scar, to the 20 years of being precisely, attentively present, to the nursery, to the 9th day, to the healing wing, to the courtyard, to Ilian at her hip in the trial circle. A chain of things, each link real. She thought, I held you all the way through it. She thought, this is what the holding produced. Callan came to the nursery on the evening of the hearing. He came after Ilian was asleep, not deliberately late, but the day had been long and complex, and by the time it finished the nursery was quiet, and the lamp was low, and Mara was in the chair with the Fox book on the table beside her, not reading, just sitting in the room the way she sat in the room. He knocked, she said, come in. He sat on the edge of the chair near the window, as he had been doing for months. They were quiet for a moment. Owen, she said. Yes, Callan said. He did not need to call it without withdrawal. No, Callan said, that was his choice. He has been on the council for 15 years. He has seen what he has seen. He paused. I think he understood what he was looking at. She thought about Owen's face as he looked at Ilian standing at her hip. She thought about the quality of the deliberation that had taken approximately 30 seconds, not because the decision was simple, but because it had been already made in some sense before Owen spoke it. Forrest, she said. He did what the law permitted him to do, Callan said. That is his right, and it was not wrong of him to do it. I know, she said. She had meant it when she told him so. Callan looked at the sleeping child across the room. The particular look he had when he looked at Ilian, the one with the specific depth to it, the weight of everything that Ilian meant. I have been thinking about something, he said. She looked at him. About what you said in the healing wing, he said. When I told you what I intended to do, he paused. You said, regardless of the rank, regardless of the announcement, the nursery, Ilian, that is the thing I want. Yes, she said. I want you to know that I heard that, he said. Exactly that, not as a deflection, not as modesty, as the truth of what you are. He paused again. He was choosing words with care in the way he sometimes did, not because he could not find them quickly, but because he wanted to find the right ones. The rank is real, the title is real, the history is real, but what I value is what was there before any of it. what was there on the night of the 9th day. She looked at him. "I value you," he said. He said it plainly, with the directness of a man who does not say things he does not mean. "Not what you did, you." The room was very quiet. Outside, the winter night was fully dark, and somewhere in the palace the night shift was taking its positions, and the world was continuing its ordinary business, and in the nursery the lamp was low and the fox book was on the table, and the sleeping child breathed slowly in his small bed. She held what he had said. She was not accustomed to being valued in the direct, specific way he had just said it. She was accustomed to being relied upon. She was accustomed to being trusted and found consistent and worth the work of keeping. Those were real things, and she had not mistaken them for nothing. But valued in the specific voice of a specific person, said plainly in a quiet room, that was different. She held it the way she had held the blue cloth, and the bread, and Ilian's voice saying she held on, and Pip's name said aloud for the first time in years. The way she held things that were given without expectation of return. "I know," she said. He looked at her, a brief, genuine smile, small, unperformed, there and then not there. "You said that to me before." "It seemed appropriate," she said. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Good night, Mara." "Good night," she said. He stood, he went to the door. At the door he paused, and she thought he was going to say something more, but he did not. He simply paused, as if confirming something private that did not require words, and then he left. The door closed. She sat in the quiet. She thought, "I do not know what shape the next part of this is." She thought, "I know what shape I am, that is enough to move from." She checked the lamp. She checked the window latch, an old habit, automatic now like breathing. She checked Ilian, who was deeply asleep, his face peaceful, one hand curled near his cheek. She went to her room, the real room with the real window and the desk and the shelf of books. She sat on the edge of the bed. She was not afraid of what was coming, not afraid of the rank and what it required, not afraid of the politics, not afraid of the Ashblood border, and whatever the next 3 years would bring in that direction, not afraid of the council and its various opinions about the appropriate size of an Omega's life. She was not afraid of Callan, which was a specific kind of not afraid that required its own accounting. She was ready for all of it. She was the kind of person who stayed ready. She lay down. She looked at the ceiling of her real room. She thought about the fox who had crossed the river, who had found on the other side things the book did not name, the things that come after the crossing, when the water is behind you and the unfamiliar ground is under your feet and the life that was waiting begins. She closed her eyes. She let the night come in. She slept. Winter settled over the palace in the way of winters that have decided to be thorough. The courtyard was white most mornings. The pine trees along the eastern wall had lost their last flexibility and stood stiff and dark against the gray sky. The frost on the stone was serious now, not the light, decorative frost of the first cold weeks, but the kind that needed to be managed, that required the kitchen staff to salt the pathways before dawn, and the stable hands to start work an hour earlier to ensure the horses did not slip on the approach roads. Ilian had opinions about snow. He had not seen much of it. He had been born in spring, and the previous 2 winters he had been too young to fully understand what it was. Now he was 3.5, and the first real snowfall had hit him like a revelation. Mara had been with him in the nursery when it started. He had been at the window watching the first flakes come down, and his expression had been the expression of a person witnessing something they had been told about but had not yet fully believed until this moment. He had pressed his face against the cold glass and exhaled a long, wondering breath that fogged it. "It's doing it," he said. "Yes," she said. "It's actually doing it." She had put on his coat, which took some negotiation, and his boots, which took more, and she had taken him out to the garden, and they had stood in the light snowfall together, and Ilian had held his palms up and watched the flakes land and melt and looked as if he had been given something enormous. She had watched him and thought, this is the thing. This specific morning, this specific child, this specific garden. The weight of the past months had been real and significant, and she carried it fully. But this was also real, both things at once. The weight and the morning, the cost and the child with his palms up in the snow. She was learning, slowly, to hold both without needing them to resolve into each other. Callan had been different since the hearing. Not dramatically different, not in a way that announced itself. He was still the same man, precise, careful, deliberate in speech, present in a room in the way that came with his rank and also with who he was beneath the rank. He still came to the nursery in the evenings. He still knocked, still sat on the edge of the chair near the window, still spoke with the particular directness that she had come to rely on as one of the few places where she could be certain of what she was hearing. But there was something in him that had shifted, some held quality, something careful and very precise, that she had been watching develop over months without quite naming it, had moved closer to the surface. She was not going to pretend she did not see it. She was not that kind of person. She was also not going to reach for it before it arrived on its own. She had waited out things that took longer than they needed to in her life. She had waited in the corridor while Pip was taken. She had waited in the healing wing while her body decided. She had waited in the trial circle for 12 members of a council to arrive at something that everyone in the courtyard had already known. She had a capacity for waiting that was not passive, not resigned, but the active, present waiting of a person who understands that some things have their own timing. She waited. It arrived in the second month of winter, on a night when the snow was coming down outside the nursery window in the soft, deliberate way of weather that has decided to take its time. Eliane was asleep. He had asked before sleeping about the fox, specifically about whether foxes got cold in the winter, and whether the fox in the book had planned for it, and whether planning for the cold was something the fox would have known to do or whether someone would have needed to tell him. She had said, "Some things you figure out when you get to them." He had found this satisfactory and gone to sleep. Callan came at his usual time. He knocked, came in, sat on the edge of the chair near the window. The snow was visible through the glass, falling in the lamplight, quiet and steady. He did not immediately say anything, which was not unusual. He often came and simply sat for a while in the particular way of a man who has been in the company of complex demands all day, and is allowing the nursery's particular quality to do what it always did, which was to be simple in a way the rest of the palace was not. She was in the chair near the door with the fox book in her lap, not reading, just holding it. The lamp was low, the room was warm. He said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "I have been thinking about what to do with this," he said. He said this with the quality of a word that is carrying a great deal more than its size. With what we have become over these months, without intending it, without planning it. She was still. "I'm not a man who speaks about things he has not thought through," he said. "I want to be clear that I have thought through this." He looked at the window. The snow was coming down in no hurry. "What I feel for you is not gratitude. I understand the difference. I have been very careful to be sure I understand the difference." He looked back at her. "Gratitude was the first thing, and I am grateful. I will be grateful for the rest of my life for what you did, but what has built since then is not that." She was looking at him. She was holding the fox book and looking at him with the complete attention she brought to things. "I am asking you nothing tonight," he said. "I want to be clear about that too. I am not asking for an answer. I am telling you what I have arrived at because you are a person who deserves to know things directly and who I have found I cannot be indirect with, even when indirect would be easier." He paused. "I would like to know you better. I would like more than the evenings in the nursery. I would like to find out what this is if you are willing." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow continued its unhurried work on the courtyard. She thought about the fox at the river's edge, standing there for a long time, looking at the water, deciding. She thought about Eliane's answer. He crosses because he has to, because if he stays on the edge, he never gets to the other side. She thought about holding things for a long time. She thought about the specific things she had held: the grief for Pip, the weight of the nursery, the chain at her collar, the judge's voice saying all 3 criteria are met. She thought about the particular capacity she had for holding on. She thought, "I have been holding this for a while too." She said, "I think I would like that as well." He looked at her. "Not quickly," she said. "I am not a person who does things quickly." "I know," he said. "I am not asking for quickly." "And it needs to be real," she said. "Not managed, not careful in the political sense, real." "Yes," he said. She looked at him, he looked at her. The snow came down on the other side of the glass, patient and indifferent and completely consistent. "All right then," she said. He almost smiled, the real one, the brief one, the one that was too genuine to be performed. "All right," he said. They sat in the quiet. The lamp burned low between them. Eliane breathed steadily in his small bed. The palace continued its night around them, the guards at their posts, the corridors settling into the deep hush of the winter hours. It was not a large moment in the surface sense. No declarations, no ceremony, no gesture. Two people in a warm room with snow outside the window and a sleeping child between them, having said a simple thing. It was completely sufficient. In the morning, the snow had settled to a clean 4 inches across the courtyard, and the garden and the pathways between the palace buildings. The kitchen staff had salted the main paths before dawn, and the pine trees along the eastern wall wore white along their branches, the dark green underneath now dramatic against it. Mara walked to the nursery in the early morning light, her breath visible in the cold, her footsteps quiet on the salted stone. She passed the 2 guards at the nursery corridor entrance, Orla's replacement tonight, a young wolf named Garrett who had taken the post seriously since the first morning, and who greeted her with the nod she had come to recognize as the nursery post-specific greeting. She went into the nursery, she checked the window, she checked the lamp oil, she checked Ilian still asleep, his face soft and complete in the way of sleeping children. She sat in the chair near the door. The morning was coming in through the window, thin and clear, the winter light that had no warmth in it but had a particular beauty, the beauty of something stripped to its essential quality, nothing extra, only itself. She thought about the year. She thought about the night of the 9th day and everything that had followed. She thought about Dora and Rafe and Petra and Aldrich and Hilda and Kit and Orla, all the people who had been in the walls of this place and in the days around the events, and who had made the events what they were by how they responded to them. She thought about the pack, the full, complicated pack, the Omegas and the high-ranked, the people who had gone to their knees and the ones who had stood, and the one who had stayed standing with a reformulating expression and come to her in an antechamber afterward to be honest. She thought about Pip, which she could do now without the particular clenching quality it used to have. She thought about him with the warmth of someone who has finally found a way to carry a loss that does not diminish the person lost. Pip at 4 years old, holding things with both hands, following her around the village with the devotion of a small creature who has chosen. She thought, you went somewhere I could not follow. But I carried you into every room I entered after that, and one of the rooms had Ilian in it, and you were there too, in the way that carried things always are. Ilian stirred. He turned over in his small bed, pulling the blanket higher, the neat instinct of a sleeping child adjusting. He did not wake. She watched him. She thought about Callan saying, I value you. She thought about what that meant and what it would continue to mean, and what the shape of the next part of things was, and she let herself think about it with the unhurried openness of a person who has learned that some shapes reveal themselves only as you move into them. She was not afraid, she was ready, both things at once as usual. The winter light came fully through the window and laid its pale stripe across the nursery floor. Ilian woke. He woke the way he always woke, not gradually, not drowsily, but with the immediate presence of a child who goes from sleep to alert in the time it takes a lamp to light. He turned over and saw her in the chair, and his face did what it always did when he saw her in the morning. She said, Good morning. He said, already climbing out of bed toward the Fox book, Is it snowing still? It stopped in the night, she said, but it is on everything. He went to the window and looked out at the white courtyard, and the white garden and the dark green trees with their white branches and the pale clear sky above. He said, the sound of someone considering. It will be here for a while, she said. Good, he said. He came back to her chair. He climbed into her lap without asking. He had always done this, and she expected he would do it for some time more, and she had never minded. She picked up the Fox book. She had thought sometimes about what the fox did after the river, after the crossing, after the new bank under his feet and the water behind him and the unfamiliar territory opening in front. She thought he probably did what creatures do when they have gone through something and survived it and arrived on the other side. He probably walked forward. He probably found the things that were there to be found. He probably learned the shape of the new territory by moving through it. He probably looked back sometimes. She thought that was real and honest. You look back. You look at the river and the bank you came from and the distance between there and here. And then you turn forward because the new ground is where you are now and it has its own things in it, and you cannot see them if you are only looking at where you were. She opened the book to the first page. The same or different, she said. Ilian considered. Different, he said, Tell me what happens after. After? After the river, after the book ends, what does the fox do? She thought about it. She thought about it with the honest attention she brought to things that required being thought about properly. He finds the river runs through the new territory too, she said. Different river, same water. And on this side there are things he couldn't see from the other bank. Good things, complicated things, things he has to figure out as he goes. Ilian was quiet for a moment, considering. Does he figure them out? He said. Eventually, she said. Does he have help? She thought about the year. She thought about Dora and Rafe and Petra and Hilda and the blue cloth and the bread and the fox pages of this specific book. She thought about Ilian pressing his face into her collar in the dark and the sound of him saying Mara when there were 4 men in the room. She thought about a man who knocked before entering and said you in a way that was not about anything else. Yes, she said, he has help. Ilian nodded. He settled more completely into her lap, the full, trusting weight of a child who is exactly where he expected to be. Good, he said. She began to read. The winter light came through the window, steady and clear. The guards were at their posts. The palace was going about its morning. The kitchen was producing the particular smell of bread that reached the corridors before anything else did. Hilda was at her bread and the stable hands were at the horses, and Petra was at her desk and Rafe was at his morning briefing, and somewhere in the east wing, a king was reading the morning intelligence reports with the focused attention of a man who has a great deal to manage, and who manages it because he has decided to. The border agreement held, the Ashblood clan was quiet. The pack was finding the shape of the new framework slowly, in the way of large things that shift gradually and then all at once. Mara read. Ilian listened. The fox moved through the new territory, finding what was there to be found. The story continued, as stories do, not with the neat resolution of a thing completed, but with the honest, open quality of a life that is in process, that has its weight and its warmth and its complications and its moments of absolute simplicity, and that goes forward because going forward is what living things do. Outside, the snow on the pine trees caught the morning light and held it, briefly luminous, before it melted. Winter. And in the winter, the palace breathed. And in the palace, the nursery was warm. And in the nursery, the lamp was steady. And a woman held a child in her lap and read about a fox on the other side of a river, and the child leaned in and listened, and the morning went on.